Okay, everyone, good evening and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, May the 16th. I wish to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the territories of the Sauk and Scia'new nations. So Council, first off will be approval of tonight's meeting agenda as presented. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre and seconded, no, don't need a seconder in a Committee of the Whole. So it's moved that the agenda for May 16th Committee of the Whole meeting be adopted as circulated by Councillor St. Pierre. Any discussion? See none, I'll call the question. All in favor, please. And that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so that takes us into our report section. And basically, we're here today to discuss the draft official community plan. So perhaps what I'll do is I'll invite staff to take us through their reports. Go ahead.
Sure. So I don't have much more to add to the report. Basically, the structure for this aspect of the OCP review is to give council the opportunity to have discussion on the specific items. I've broken it down into 5 different parts, just kind of keeping in mind the time allocation for tonight. Sure. So yes, thank you. So I've broken it down into 5 different parts, noting that I anticipate the bulk of the conversation is going to come around parts 3, 4, and 7 of the document. So when we talk about the different growth management and land use aspects, the community policies, and of course, the development permit areas where there's been a lot of discussion recently about the implementation of those and what items should stay, potentially be revised, and so forth. So I don't want to spend too much more time going over these pieces. I want to give council ample opportunity to have discussion. So really just going through each piece, starting with parts 1 and 2 to kind of open up the discussion on these items that council would like clarity or potential revisions.
Would it be possible to bring up the relevant sections of the OCP on screen? And would it be possible to get the other screen going by any chance?
Yes, our deputy corporate officer is just going to pull that up for us.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe that should be available on the screen now. So if we have the specific page number, we can get staff to jump to that so it's visible on the screen.
I think the intent at one point had been to go through, I don't know about line by line, but page by page, section by section. So I'm just going to throw that out and start at the beginning and move forward. But
Okay, sorry for that disruption there. So I understand we're just sort of how are we going to get through this tonight? And that's where I look for a bit of help actually from members of council on that. Sensing it's better just to go through it starting in the beginning to the end rather than jumping all over, or were you looking to be more of what did you hear? And then I just think that methodically it might just be better to go through it in order. Thoughts?
That's all I like to see.
Councillor Bettle.
Yeah, I think we had this discussion before about, we'll start at the front and we'll finish at the back. And some of these things are just say, fine, next page, fine, next page, and go on. But it'll take a bit of time. Thus, we're meeting at 6 instead of 7.
So we'll start that and
Yeah.
see where we go. Councillor Bateman?
And as you say, as we go through this, we can interject material that we picked up through the public comment and wherever else.
Okay,
Correct? Yeah.
yeah,
So
that
it's
would make
not-
sense.
Yeah.
Okay, well, looking at the cover page, obviously, what is missing for me is the consultant team that was engaged for this is not listed anywhere in the document. So I think just somewhere, usually you would see their logo, their name, and who they are, because that's who we invested or engaged with to bring that in. So I'll just leave that as sometimes I've seen it right on the cover page or the inside page there. So the next part would be, there's a, to me, looks like a statement of reconciliation. So I think it's the case that may need to be said that that's what that is, a statement of reconciliation or something of that nature. I think this all reads fine, but I would just note that in the last paragraph where it starts off with it invites us a settler government, it should be local government. I don't know that settler government at this time is a legitimate form of government.
I'm not really sure where you're at. so-
I'm on page 1, right here. So like the first,
Okay,
And it's coming up on this.
I got her. Yeah, I got the same page. Okay.
so I don't know, this is where to staff, like, am I to make that as a motion? Like, are we looking to have like 1,000 resolutions by the end of tonight, or how, is it gonna be by consensus?
Our initial thought was that by consensus would work, and at the end, you could make a recommendation to consolidate all recommendations made by consensus and bring them forward for June the 2nd or June the 7th, sorry. So we are writing down all the recommendations as you make them, but it would be up to council to stop you if they didn't want consensus on an item.
Okay, so then if we disagree, if we're not in consensus, then we'll do a vote, that sort of thing. Does that work for everyone? Does that make sense to add like a statement to write statement of reconciliation at the top and to change settler to local?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay,
Yeah, agree.
Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, my concern there, without that, acknowledging human relationships to place is an ancient practice that continues today. And in fact, this OCP is acknowledging human relationship to place. But if it's a territorial acknowledgement, then that's a separate matter.
That's a good point, but I don't know what this is like a territorial acknowledgement. Would that be the intent? I don't know, because I wasn't, maybe Councillor Beddoes or Mr. Powell of an answer on what the intent there was. Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I just have to read it again.
Okay, Mr. Powell.
Yeah, so it was acknowledging that this work has been done on those traditional lands. So more so along the lines of a territorial statement.
So like a territorial acknowledgement. Okay. Good. Okay, thank you, Councillor St. Pierre.
I found the actual sentence that follows settler government or local government at this point a little bit awkward and unclear in some ways. We have to reflect on how we may perpetuate. That sounds like we want to try and continue perpetuating, which is very odd. So I find just the way it's presented, I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is to be aware and to reflect on colonial processes that continue to exist, something along those lines. And that would be very simple to put down, to reflect on colonial processes that continue to exist. That doesn't mean they're bad, that doesn't mean they're good, just means trying to be aware. Whereas this is a little bit weird and from which we have benefited. I don't know. It seems overly complicated and a little bit obscure.
Okay, so suggestion was it invites us, a local government, to reflect on colonial processes, on how, okay, you're a better writer.
Yeah, so on how colonial processes are ongoing.
Sure, period.
Yeah, I don't care. I thought it was fine the way it was, but it doesn't hurt it by adding that, so I'm okay with it.
Okay, we got that stuff. Okay, thank you. The preamble came from the committee, so I just sort of left that as that's the work that they provided. Councillor Meadows?
Yeah, the committee put a great deal of, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yes, through your worship. Yeah, the committee put a great deal of effort into that. We looked at it and shortened it and did a number of different things with it. And what you see is the end result. And, I'm okay with it.
Councillor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, I think the preamble's fine. There's just one thing on the signatures. Norm Amaro's name, I believe, is spelled incorrectly. I don't think it's plural.
Okay, we'll confirm the spelling there. Good catch.
I've just got one item.
Go ahead.
Preamble on page 1 at the bottom, third last line is climate mitigation and adaptation.
Sorry, Councillor Bateman, where is that? Page 1?
Page 1, third last line, first column, climate mitigation and adaptation, not adaption.
Okay. Oh, good catch.
Gee, I read that 6 times.
Adaptation.
I know, easy to miss. It is well.
Adaption.
Oh, and it's our housing needs report. Just above that, where it calls our plans, our parks and trails, and our housing needs report. Okay. That takes us to, I'm looking at the picture and the top that says contents. And then it takes us through the all of that. And seems fine. The next is the vision for soup.
Actually,
Go ahead, Councillor. Baker.
regarding the contents page, I think there should be page references to maps and figures in that content section so that we can all quickly reference them.
Oh, so like at part 8 or just
No,
like-
this would be just page references to maps and figures within
Okay.
the document.
So adding a section, like a section,
Yeah. Follow part 7 in the contents.
okay, so following part 7, there would be maps and figures and then a listing of those maps and data tables.
Yeah.
And the relevant page numbers to be added. Okay. Good. Okay, that brings us to the vision for Souk page where there's a picture and then there's the visioning statement. Is there any way, do we know, like, do we give photo credit though to where the photos came from? Is there a way of maybe noting, overlooking Souk from here? Like, or is that, do we need to put that in at all?
I wouldn't bother, but
Not
I
bother,
appreciate what
okay.
you said.
I don't know, Councillor Logans?
Photo credit would be appropriate, but I think a description, we don't need to do it, yeah.
Councillors, can I just remind you, if you're not speaking, to turn off your microphones? It's just the feedback through the recording. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, just a point around photo credits. They're often listed at the back of the book, right? In documents of this kind, so that an individual's name is not prominent in these official documents.
Okay.
Just as a procedure, perhaps, as you,
Yeah, no, that would make sense. I'm just gonna add a sticky to the end then. Councillor Logans?
We do on page 14 have a description of the image itself. So I feel like if we have one, they should all be, or they should all be none.
Yeah, I think that's a good catch. So,
I'm fine with them all being none.
some of them though, it's nice to know where like this, the first one, it's kind of obvious, but some of the other ones aren't. So I think where possible, we should be adding them.
And then that brings us to the issue of having some of them with and without. So if we do them all with, we do them all with.
It's one or the other.
One or the other.
We could be fluid with it. I agree that this. The view from Bouncy Boulevard, I think with binoculars from the town center, I was a little confused by that image.
So this is view from Brownsy Boulevard in the, oh, I see, in Souk's Town Core. View of, yeah, because we're not in the towns. The one, because it's taken on, it must be taken from the water or a drone footage, right? Like it's not in the town center. So that just needs to be changed. View from Brownsy Boulevard from the Souk Harbor.
That's what it is. It's the foot of Brown.
Oh, I see. View from Brownsy Boulevard in the town center looking over.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor St. Pierre.
I'm almost afraid of saying this in terms of opening a can of worms, but I was
Yeah.
looking at the letter from the OCP committee, and they really did some good work in terms of actually boiling down what they heard from the community in terms of their vision for the community, 5 different points very clearly laid out. But the vision for Souk doesn't actually seem to reflect that very well. Which seems odd.
Yeah, okay.
So we have a lot of input from the community in terms of the vision for the community, and that it's boiled down by the committee. But then the actual vision statement doesn't reflect that.
Mr. Schaefer?
And if I might, your worship, the vision, the preamble provided by the committee breaks down their discussions. The vision is something that is potentially 2 or 3 steps back from that defines the direction of the entire document, as opposed to being reflective of the 6 points or 5 points that are reflected in the, or that are pointed out in the preamble. So it didn't ring to me the way it does for Councillor St. Pierre. I would just suggest that it's perhaps a broader view of the entire process than the preamble and the feedback from the community.
Maybe I could ask Councillor Meadows, how was the vision determined? How was it brought forward?
No, it's not an easy answer, but I'll try to do my best. The vision were brought forward by the input from the people we had online. And that was the consensus from the group to adopt that vision. And I'm going back over a year, so I'm not exactly sure the details of the discussion, but that's what we settled on. But the committee, including myself, felt that the preamble, just to explain our involvement, and was necessary to flush out, because the statement is just a little statement, and it can mean so much to so many different people. And in order to get it right, you would have to write 100 statements from 100 different people to see it 100 different ways. So this is sort of what we came up with, and that's not just the committee, that's with staff and the consultants. So a lot of thought had gone into it. And again, we could, other people may see it differently, but that's how it came about.
Appreciate that.
Thanks. Mr. Paulo?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that to assist with council. So this page that's on the screen right now is just kind of like a graphic representation. When we talk about the vision and the whole context of the document, it actually begins on page 38 and 39, where it lays out how the vision plays into the development of the goal areas and then the objectives and the policies. So this is more so just kind of a graphic, and it just so happens the preamble is there setting the stage for the person who wants to open up and try and get their feet wet with the first 10 pages. Here's what they're to expect, and then we get into the nitty gritty of the rest of the document. That's with page 38 commencing that part.
Councillor Lajeunesse? Did I see a hand? Okay,
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on Councillor Beddoes, and that that this is being distilled through multiple meetings from quite a larger, and it was rooted in the first round of engagement. And that was the distinct, concise statement.
Okay.
A lot of work went into that.
The other question is there a photo of the committee? Maybe not, because you're always on Zoom. Was there like a screenshot of the? Do we
There
have
was.
that?
Not in the OCP itself. There was in, when we went out to the public in the paper and online. These are your members of the OCP committee, and this is how you get a hold of them. But I don't think there's actually one in the document.
Okay, just maybe a
Is that
thought
right? Yeah, I think that's the case.
would be to where the committee's preamble is just to add a photo of the committee, if we have one. Okay. Moving on, look at that. All right, so anything with the part one introduction and context page on page 15? Do we add, like, what about the 2,000 touch points? Is to update that number.
It has from 1,000 to
2,000 is the update?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's okay. Anything else? Okay, I'm just gonna turn the page. Page 16, 1.1, purpose of this plan. The one paragraph that sticks out to me is at the very bottom of paragraph, it says an official community plan is required by law, prepared and adopted in compliance with the Provincial Local Government Act. My understanding and what's on the provincial website is that local governments are not required to adopt an official community plan. However, if you choose to adopt one, it must include this and be put into a bylaw form. So I think that needs to be clear that Sue chose to have one. We didn't have to have one.
And staff have noted that already as a revision to that, to remove required. It was part of the legal review as well.
Okay, so that'll be changed. Okay, thank you. Councillor Bateman.
Can we go back one page? I just missed that the opening line of the states more than 1 year. In fact, it's being 2 years. So maybe we could state 2 years. Culmination of 2 years of creative and inspiring engagement, if indeed we adopt it within the next 3 months.
Could be 3 years.
Could be 3 years. Maybe a big question.
You know,
mark on that
technically,
one.
this process started in 2016.
Yeah.
So you could, however, I'll leave it as,
I use 18 months.
I think it's coming on 2. Yeah, so, okay, good catch.
Jane, go ahead. Yeah.
Page 17. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the big things that it took me a long time to realize is that this OCP is not supposed to be all encompassing, and that in fact, in this upper box in the upper right-hand corner, it does state exactly that. Now, I know there will be an electronic version of this document, and I would recommend that we have links to the background research report, pages 116 to 129, which does list all of the documents that align with this OCP. And we are also in the Parks and Trails Master Plan background document summary, pages 81 to 83, also gives some really big details. Because much of the comments I read again over the last couple of weeks do miss that point, that other plans carry a lot of the raw actual information, blah, blah.
No, that's an excellent point there on that. Councillor St. Pierre.
When I've been explaining the intent of the OCP to anyone who cared to know, I've been describing it as a vision document that actually guides council in creating and crafting their strategic plan, which is then turned into yearly budgeting and whatever's pulled out of the strategic plan, which is then turned into quarterly reports, and that's how it all sort of evolves. I think it'd be useful for people to actually understand that a little bit better, mostly because otherwise people think that the OCP is where it begins and ends. Whereas if they actually want to participate further and be a part of strategic planning and showing up for budgets and so on and so forth, then they can actually, have some say in how the OCP is realized and how it actually, comes into being as a reality, as opposed to an aspiration, because otherwise it's just an aspiration. But, what is an OCP? Well, it's part of that process. People put way too much weight on it otherwise. I mean, it's important that it be done right, and that it not be overly prescriptive and not box us in where it shouldn't be. And that's something else that I don't see mentioned here. It shouldn't be prescriptive in the ways that make it difficult to actually realize the aspirations, depending on what happens. But again, I don't necessarily see that wish for a certain amount of care in that piece.
No, that's a valid point. I think I would agree that that needs to be in here, because there's also the piece where, depending on what councils decide to put into their budgets or not, then if the work isn't properly sustained or planned for in a financial plan, then it doesn't do anything.
That defines whether or not the OCP is a document sitting gathering dust on a shelf or actually a document that's guiding the community.
Well, it's the implementation.
Yeah.
Really, if you don't resource it, then it just sits there, right? Yeah. Well, it's just, I think the section here just needs to be worked a bit more. Like, it needs to be reflective of what's on the provincial website. So that's one part that Mr. Pella already picked up. And then there's another piece on where it talks about having how it works here. After first reading, for example, the local government must, this is off the provincial website, 1, consider the OCP in conjunction with its financial plan and any relevant waste management plan. 2, refer the OCP to the Agricultural Land Commission if there is land in the LR. 3, hold a public hearing. But the financial plan is not noted here, so that piece is missing. So that's where it should reflect what the Local Government Act is requiring us to do, but how to write that. Like, I haven't sat down and written. This is where this process is a bit tough, because I don't have an edited suggestion other than to take this and put it in here.
I think a flow chart could actually just capture a lot of that. And then a quick statement, similar to the one, OCP is not intended to provide highly detailed policies. Perfect. That's a great statement. Something similar or added in there, and therefore should not be overly prescriptive. You'll be okay.
My only challenge is what you're saying, Councillor St. Pierre, is I don't think this could bind a future council. A future council could come in and rescind the whole thing. Like, you can't and put that into their strategic plan. Like,
Absolutely so. But what I hear over and over again is that amending an OCP is an onerous process. Making sure that you're not actually binding yourselves in uncomfortable ways is useful to do from the start.
but I think it's more the policies that council adopts has to fit in to the OCP umbrella. So
Yes.
there needs to be that alignment, but a council, when it's formed, I've never sat in a workshop where we even talked about the OCP when it came to forming a strategic plan. Like, we didn't sit there and discuss our OCP. We may be that, oh, we need to review it, and that was an action item, but it wasn't, the work in the strategic plan wasn't necessarily reflective of the overriding OCP that was adopted at the time. I don't know if anyone viewed the strategic planning sessions differently. Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, a little concerned about getting bogged down here. I think, however, as the district umbrella document, all other district plans, strategies, and bylaws must align with the OCP. It's not, to me, it's not imperative that the council knows the OCP inside and out. It's imperative that the staff knows this thing and there to advise us. I think with that statement right there, that says that all our plans, our financial plans, our strategies must align with the OCP. I just don't think you need to complicate it anything more than that. And that's my concern, is that, again, this is just a broad document. That statement just, I think it says it all pretty clearly. So I really wouldn't want to see us get bogged down into, anything other than that. It is a all-encompassing document, but it's very broad, and that's a broad statement, and I think it covers it.
No, that works. I would just note our relevant plans that we have. So as Councillor Bateman said, they link together. If someone is looking for that, they can link. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I'll just note that there was a particularly good open house panel on how the OCP relates to other district policy documents. That was from September, last September. So that seemed to explain it more clearly. However, I think this OCP on an OCP page will be clustered with all this other material. So it's very interesting looking at other OCPs selectively. I'm looking at Otter Point and East Soup, for example, which are very, very dry legislative documents that in fact do the job as intended. And I think at the very outset, that was one of the intentions with this OCP, was to distill it down to a really as Councillor Beto says, for staff to utilize in their work with the community.
That was what we had set out to do. And I think that's, like, I'll admit, that is my challenge with this, is when we set it out that way, it was to be, we were going to have one, and it was going to meet just the required amounts, because we have other excellent plans that we're working on or have adopted that can evolve outside of an OCP. So this would be to point to that. And that's where I just have it challenged when all these other things came in. And it was sort of said to me that, well, that's what the community wanted, and that's fine, but when that they want that, but we have it. And then there's a risk of duplication or inconsistency, or they don't fit. So that's why it's just, that's why I find this really difficult. Sorry, but it is what it is, but I don't know how to untangle that at this point. It's just, this is what's in front of us. Okay. On that note, 1.2, page 118? Yes. It's obvious, okay.
Don't look to me for those catches. You'll
No.
never get them.
On page 18, community contacts, so just note that SAUC has a capital S. Councillor Logans?
Also, this graphic is very pixelated, and it doesn't work with the other images we have in this document that are not pixelated. I think we need to scrap it and get a better one that will print properly.
Okay. Page 18.
That comes from another data source. So we just copied that into our document. So is the suggestion that we create something separate from the treaty association's mapping, or just a comment about the pixelation?
Mostly about the pixelation, not the data within the map itself. That's good information, but if it's possible to get a better quality image, or perhaps not, like it looks like it's been stretched, maybe it needs to be a bit smaller. I'm a bit perplexed as to why we would even have a print version except for a handful in the office, but if this were online, even just linking to this would be a good idea. It just doesn't look professional.
No, it's a good catch, Councillor Logans. The other one, and I appreciate that it's coming from another source, and if it is what's kept, that's fine, but there should be a note that we're referring to Scia'new in this document, and this still says Beecher Bay. So maybe a note to add that in below, because otherwise one could ask where Scia'new is, because they're not cited here in this. So we just need to add that. Councillor St. Pierre?
Excuse the ignorance. I've also heard the patchy dat referred to, but I don't see that here and I don't know if it's supposed to be or not.
Believe they fall outside of the Tamuk.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure about that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, or just shrink it. That would make sense, right? Because it doesn't need to be that big. Anything on page 19? My only piece there is that in the very first paragraph, the memorandum of understanding creating in 2007, that just a note that date may be revised. So depending on, I'm just flagging that, depending on when this is adopted and when that document is revised, then that would need to change. Depending on which one comes first. Go ahead.
So in reviewing some of these other OCPs, in ESUC, for example, in their community context section, they have a statement that they will work in collaboration and partnership with First Nations, the ALC, provincial ministries, federal departments, Island Health, Sauk School District 62, District of the Chosen, District of Sauk, and other necessary agencies and groups to address infrastructure, transportation, energy and emissions management, and environmental concerns. So a statement like that would seem to be a true community context, as opposed to immediately beginning and then following on with partnership with Sauk Nation, etc. I know to a degree that is covered in the regional context statement on page 20.
But not fully, because the regional context refers more to the CRD
Yeah.
as a whole, as opposed to what you've broken down.
Yeah.
So that makes sense that should be added. So I think if we added a community, what did you call it?
Yeah, it was, it could be an introduction. In ESUC, they call it collaboration with other agencies and authorities in their very precise way.
Okay, and collaboration with, can you repeat that?
Well, First Nations.
No, sorry, not the whole box, but
Oh.
the heading.
Collaborations with other agencies and authorities is on page 7 of the ESUC OCP.
Okay. And then it would list off those particular ones.
Yeah.
Okay. And then to
Interestingly,
add.
it also, if you don't mind,
Go ahead.
it also states in that same paragraph, the CRD and the District of Sauk have signed a memorandum of understanding. Provides a framework for reaching agreements on the provision of services, land use planning, development, and environmental concerns, shared and cross-boundary issues. So I wasn't aware of that MOU for whatever reason.
Would probably have to do with fire services delivery and some of the other, but I'm not 100% on it. It's just because where Silver Spray or Sauk Point is, right on the other side of the CRD lands. Okay. So I'll just add the box from ESUC. Okay. Councillor Lajeunesse.
I wonder, the image that's there, I wonder if we can come up with a better image than that one, just because the power pole with all the transformers hanging off of it, not the most attractive thing.
That may be what we have. So I think it'll just depend if there was a different angle taken. But it sort of shows that we still have a lot of wires that need to go underground. Welcome, Councillor McMath. We are on page 20. So that brings us to the regional context piece. One of the CRD services to add would be the fire dispatch services. We just rolled over a 5-year agreement. I don't remember the exact language of what that is, but we should ensure that we have them all covered off here. But there is definitely fire dispatch. There's also the Victoria, did that name change, the family court? Because it's,
not a service.
but it's now part of the CR, it falls under the CR umbrella, of which we fund a little bit, but it is a service that's, we don't have to do as a local government, that a group is of municipalities is doing together, right? So we are paying into the overhead or everything that supports that committee. And in that way, it is sort of a piece of local government is that you have X, so it should be listed here.
Yeah.
But is the,
Then you're gonna get comprehensive, so it
Mm.
currently says include, so that it's a sample of the most important one. Not to say the Victoria Family Court isn't important.
I know, but when a counselor spends a month, every month attending the meeting and has been diligently for over a decade. I mean, I don't know, like, I don't know where this cuts. Counselor Logan?
It belongs in our annual report.
Okay, we'll leave it there, but I would ask add fire dispatch, because we do fund, we are paying that, and that's something that we need to be mindful of, is it in the years to come? Okay, go ahead.
Can I just see a lowercase p on regional parks and lowercase c on animal control? That is.
Okay. 22 and 23. Counselor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, 22, where it shows the pronunciation of Sauk. How does that looks like sook or souk, and it's pronounced Sauk, so I'm not sure how that works. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, when the climate action plan. To look into that, but maybe the chief could be asked to provide us with a proper pronunciation.
Sure, and it probably should have been addressed earlier in the document where the South Nation was first mentioned.
Well, I think it digs into it here. I would just note, though, that the Sauk have their own language that isn't Senchofan. So that's just another piece that needs to be, if we're going to do this, it should be stated correctly that they have their own particular dialect that isn't Senchofan.
Just as a note through the chair, usually when I write it down, what I'm telling people is SOWK is a better way to put it in sort of our alphabet, Sauk. But whatever works.
That's better than SOOK. Oh, that's better than that. Okay, we'll start with that. Okay, the other pieces where it feels like it cuts off to me is at the very final paragraph. Like our history as a municipality, sort of as an incorporated municipality, began in 1999. And it only sort of fits in a sentence. So, but since then, there's been still like waste, like sewer, the area has a sewer now. There's its own municipality, like it's resourced in its own way. It has a parks department now. So there has to be a bit more about our own municipalities' history here as to how we get to this OCP today. And it should be noted that this is our third OCP since incorporation. I read the first one on the weekend. That was interesting. Just how things change, but the vision is still the same. I think how the road on how you get there is what changes things, but the vision is the same. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a very good point, that needs to be elaborated on. And as I stated in an earlier meeting, the 2001 OCP lists the various documents that this current OCP builds on, and it dates back to SOUP 2000 document in 1987 and some CRD area plans. So just to put context, through recent historical context.
Councillor Bettis?
So that's on page 7 of the 2001 official community plan.
I just, one of the intents of this new OCP was to try and not to fill it full of a lot of
Junk.
Well, I won't say junk because it's not junk, but I think somewhere along the line, we just have to accept a statement as and not have to flush it out to the nth degree. I don't think the community much cares about that. I think anybody in this community knows that, we have sewers now, we have this and that. So, I mean, it's just a statement that, we're a fairly young municipality, just started in 1999. I think that's basically all really needs to be said. Again, that's just my opinion. If we start flushing everything out, then we go against to what we originally intended on doing, was to eliminate a lot of that stuff and just get down to the nitty gritty. So I'm a little, I get a little frustrated at times when I understand the intent, and it's all good stuff and it's all valid. But I wonder about, is it really necessary to put it in the document? Because if people start reading that, then the document gets so cumbersome. Put it down.
But then that's where it should all come out then. Like, that's the challenge that I'm at. It's either it's in or it's not.
Well, my challenge when I was reading through this is to put enough to satisfy where we're going with it, but not too much that we bog down with all the details of where we are and where we come from. I think just that statement, most people know that we're only been around for 22 years. But I mean, it's up. I'm only one on council. I mean, I think, again, I'm trying to live with something to try and keep it brief and to the point and get down to those nitty gritties that really get people upset, as opposed to some of these colorful statements. So that's just my opinion.
Councillor St. Pierre?
I think I'd agree with Councillor Beddoes on this. Also, I think that unless there's stuff that we actively think is wrong, it needs to be changed because it will actually cause problems. We have to more or less respect that there's been a lot of work gone into this before, and stuff has been done over many times. We can go over it again. We could probably make improvements, but we also want to get through this and I think respect all the work that went into it. I'll try and keep that in mind myself because I'm the worst, but no, just to say.
Sorry, folks, I didn't have my microphone on. When it comes to making it more correct, then on page 20, what is the Traffic Safety Commission? I don't know what that is. So if it comes to only having what's relevant, that just jumped out at me now. I looked at it so many times, I didn't see it till now, but I don't know what that is. So that's where I think that should come out.
Kick it out.
Because I don't think it's there. My only piece about being a municipality is that a lot of our work is on the planning of our community, which is wastewater, the road infrastructure. People ask why we don't pick up garbage, it's not a service we provide, this is, and these are. So that's where I do feel there has to be some reflection about, it just jumps from incorporation, like it talks about time immemorial, pre-incorporation to 20 years after the fact. And the 20 years in between is missing to me. Go either way on this.
But that, excuse me, Your Worship, that could be a book. What's happened in the last 22 years in this community. A lot of things have happened. And is that what's really needed in an official community plan? I mean, it's about going forward. I just don't want to see us get bogged down on another 3 pages of text.
Councillor Logans?
It is in books. It would be in about 22 books, our annual reports. So this is an overarching document that links to many reports, and those are part of them. But I know, I understand where you're coming from. I just also agree with Councillor Beddoes. Maybe in 50 years, we can add in the last 70 and stick it in.
Hopefully will not be here at that time. Serious problem otherwise. Okay, I'm on the fence on that one. But we'll move on to 24, where it talks about climate. This information has to be updated. So the, if we don't have anything more newer than 2013, then I don't think it should be in here. It's over 10 years old for the first table 1 chart. And then on the populations and demographics, it's all based on 2016 data. And so I know at the time of writing, the census data didn't come out, but that should all be updated and everything should be updated. And just particularly if we really want to get into anything on climate change, even referencing the past year would be more helpful than what occurred, than what is in here. Councillor Bateman?
So this climate page is interesting. I know the authors are trying to be very neutral about this. However, when I read a line like climate change is anticipated to change these normals, I think we could safely say it has changed these normals. That's one comment. This range of temperatures, are those highs, lows? That's the median temperature. It claims to be using the Climate Atlas of Canada, which I looked at on the weekend, and the numbers are different, slightly. So I'm being nitpicky, Councillor Beddoes, and I'm going to take in mind that this is not to be a definitive document, it's to be a functional working document. However, we need to get these things straight. In the impact of climate change, it states a median, climate change modeling estimates a median increase of 1.55 degrees Celsius by 2050. Now, the CRD in its 2017 CRD climate projections for the capital region states in its very opening line in the executive summary, temperatures in the capital region are warming. Global climate models project an average annual warming of about 3 degrees Celsius in our region by the 2050s. So that 1.55 versus 3 degrees. I think the point is we need to emphasize the urgency here. And that's local CRD's number I would like to see in there. Then we also have extreme heat days above 30 degrees Celsius from less than 1 day per year to 2 to 3 days per year. Again, with a reference to the Climate Atlas, it states there have been 2 days per average above 30 between 1976 and 2005. And then it goes into projections based on either a high carbon future or a low carbon future. A high carbon future, there will be 5.3 days by 2050, and low carbon, there would be 4.7 days. And finally, on this page, then we have a increase of 9 to 14% in annual precipitation, although dry spells are expected to increase. A dry spell, the word is drought. It has been, there have been a series of drought summers. It states the nature of things, of all places, states 23 severe droughts on Vancouver Island since 1674, but there have been, I think, 5 in the last 7 years of severe drought conditions. So I think we can safely say dry spell is not the right word in that context. Finally, that chart, I cannot read. I don't understand that chart in the least. I need a PhD to read that. I don't know.
I think we can find something probably more accurate, probably through the CRD or another. And even the chart itself is, like I said, I just looked
Yeah.
at it and I didn't put a lot of time into it because it just looked dated to me. It's the timing is other things. So there's likely more current information available there. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I guess the overall message that I want to see come out of this, I don't care where they get the charts or whatever it is, that things are changing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether we use 1.35 or 3, or the thing is, that's the message that I want to see, personally, I want to see get
Yeah.
across here. So, I mean, we can go to 20 different sources and get 20 different sets of figures. All we need to do here is show a set of figures that things are getting worse.
Hmm.
And I don't mind the drought as opposed to dry spell. But again, it's just, what's the overall intent here? Is things are changing. We have to be aware of it. The OCAP is taking this into consideration in this document. And that's what the people of this community wanted. Very, very clear. They wanted to make it clear that things are changing. Status quo is no good anymore. So just again, keep it simple. Let's not
Yep.
get too involved.
No, that's fine. We'll just get the current data set there. And I'm sure that's exactly what all 20 sources would tell you, except for maybe, never mind, we'll name that source. Go ahead, Councillor St. Pierre.
I was just thinking that given the land use aspect of the document, should we be looking at what the experts have to say about sea level change in around Suk and, this area?
If it's not elsewhere,
I
then
believe
it
is
should
elsewhere.
also,
I believe it is elsewhere.
it's referenced elsewhere. I don't know if the table is there.
But
now.
I'm thinking that in this particular paragraph, mentioning that climate change is expected to affect sea level or to change that. But then again, I've heard different. I don't have all the information. I'm not a geographer in that area. I think it'd be interesting just to get appropriate information on sea level.
Yeah,
changes,
just accurate
but
sources.
put it under the climate.
Yeah, but accurate.
Because people are going to be looking for it there too.
Yes. Yep. And then for the population and demographics, we're all okay to update that. And then just to update the projections. Okay.
It's such a.
Well, that was interesting. The population is expected to continue aging. Like, are we in denial of that? But I'm reading it too.
Mike, I have another question about the population demographics. I do have a concern that given that Suk does have a nice climate, and even with climate change close to the ocean, moderating influence of the ocean and all the rest, good freshwater supply, thank you very much to the CRD and all the rest. I expect that with time, we're going to end up with a lot of people that are in more severe drought conditions, that are experiencing wildfires and so on and so forth, more refugees from war-torn countries and so on and so forth. I suspect that even if it's not, I don't think we can exactly predict what's likely to happen. But I think that mentioning under population demographics that this is an unknown factor that we might want to anticipate. We don't know exactly what the pressures are going to be as far as all that stuff goes. Personally, I expect us to have a certain number of refugees that we may not want to turn away as a compassionate community and so on and so forth. But I'm just putting it out there because I don't think these stats are reflective of the true future.
Councillor Beddoes?
How can we ever predict the true future? I mean,
Well, we
could,
can't. That's the
there could be a
challenge.
huge war in Asia and it changes things and everything could quiet down. All we can do is put in there that our demographics and how our population is probably going to develop. So, I know right now we're up to our eyeballs in the Ukraine, but I've been around a few years longer than most of you. I've seen a few conflicts. This too will pass and there'll be another group right after it.
I'm not looking at a prediction because I don't think that's possible, like you're saying. I do think, however, that being clear at the outset that we might want to expect the unexpected in terms of population.
Mr. Schaefer?
I don't disagree with any of those points, your worship. I think the last paragraph on page 25 notes that we're currently experiencing reliance on in-migration and a small amount of immigration to those born outside of Canada. And I think adding a clause or another sentence that says, given different international situations that could change at any point. That might cover off the concerns. It might not. I think it is a projection, and it is to a certain extent crystal ball gazing.
Yep, so works for me. Sound good? Great. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a very tricky one. And it came up at the open house. The individual came up to me and said, how does the district control growth? Okay, so we're going to anticipate 18,500 people here by 2030. This is based on a 2.9% growth rate. However, over the last 5 years, we grew by 16%, which is, I believe, 3.2% per year. So an extra 0.3% growth, over which we have seemingly, we have no control. What if suddenly there's a 5% growth in Sooke? How do we monitor over a 10-year period our population and dwelling counts to ensure that this OCP is being respected?
I think that comes through the housing needs report that we have done, is that document is meant to be, Mr. Powell, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the housing needs report needs to be updated every 5 years or less to keep it relevant. So I think that's why that document is listed in here, and that's where that may come from. Would that be correct?
Yes, and I'm part of the implementation table and overall monitoring. We would like to do more active monitoring of our OCP policy. So whether it's having the statistics to go through applications year over year to see, how many more units are being created for housing, how many more parks and so forth, and start to put together a more detailed informed land use package to then report back to council as part of your annual report to say, yes, here are the policies of the OCP that are being met. Here are the areas that aren't being met. So from a work plan and budgeting standpoint, what can we do to then address those items if they fall within the strategic priorities chart?
But to your question, Councillor Bateman, I don't think you can control growth. Well, you can monitor and perhaps manage what you have, but if you encourage young people or, that you decide to have children or more than one, there's no way of managing that. Or family moves in with family, there's the freedom of movement that is allowed. So you can't stop any of that. That's beyond, we don't want that sort of ability or power at a local government. No government should have that. Councillor Lajeunesse, then Beddoes.
Yeah, I think this whole section needs to be updated because we're relying on 2016 census numbers, and like the average occupied private dwelling average value 412,000, for at least double that now. And so, well, yeah, maybe, but yeah, I think before we even worry about this section, we need to update to current numbers.
Yeah, you're one page ahead of us, but yes, agreed. Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, just on the growth, our job is to manage the growth. It's not necessarily to, stop it. It is just to control it. That's why this OCP has taken some turns about densities in the downtown and the demographics and the type of housing that people are looking for. That's all being sort of worked into this document too. I know it's frustrating to a lot of people in Sooke say, why can't you just turn it off? And of course, we know that that's very, very difficult to do. So other than, getting more up-to-date figures, and I agree there that it's got to be something more up-to-date, because we were looking at these from a year and a half ago and it was the same figures. So if we can work in some new figures, it doesn't change anything. It just gives somebody a little bit better picture. But I guess, again, to me, the message we want to get across is that there's a lot of growth pressures on Soo, and there will be, no matter who sits in these chairs. Everybody's going to have to deal with it. And that's what needs to be reflected in the OCP, that things are going to be pretty volatile in the next 10 years. Just and that's everywhere and on the Pacific coast here. And I think it does that. Update the numbers. I don't have a problem with that if we can get them.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Just a quick answer to the growth thing. We can't control growth, but we can certainly speed it up if we try. All you have to do is just zone a lot of high density or zone a lot more, green spaces and green fields into suburbs and so on and so forth. You can absolutely increase the speed of growth. You can also manage it. And I think that's what we're talking about. So it's not that we can actually control it, but we can try and, we're not completely rudderless, but mostly what we can do is try and slow it down versus speeding it up.
Councillor Bateman?
So thank you for that. So that's the gas pedal. We can put the gas on, but to put the brake on, I was wondering if there a statement could be added here to the effect, or somewhere in the document, the District of Souk and its elected councils have the ability to challenge, reject, and re-envision these projections. Because I would hate to see policy.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, the District of Souk and its elected councils have the ability or the right or the responsibility to challenge, reject, and re-envision these population projections. Because if we're not getting any action on Highway 14, for example, and we're getting gridlock on Highway 14, how can we possibly invite 22,000 people here by 2040? So council, one after next, should have the right to adjust the pace of growth as they see fit, to put those brakes on.
But these doesn't lock the council into anything. They're just projections.
It's just a projection.
The councils have the ability at any time to deal with that sort of things. These are getting the stats of the regional growth strategy and the provincial growth strategies and saying, okay, this looks like what's going to happen to Soo. So in the OCP, we're aware that it's going to happen in Soo, and then it's the council of the day. Certainly always has had that ability to say, well, you just try and turn something off and tell somebody they can't build on their property, but see what happens. But these are projections. They're not they don't lock us into anything. We always have the power to do that. So again, let's just clean it up. And
Yeah, I would stay with that. Curious though, since you have the current tables, what is the most recent population for us? 16, do you have that? 16,350 or something?
Sure.
Yeah, or the latest census data. Do you have that?
15,086, a 16% increase, and we have 6,431 private dwellings in Souk.
6,431?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was over 16,000. Okay. I gave the wrong information at the open house.
But the population is 15,086.
15,086. Okay. Okay. On to page 26. This is where, again, it just needs to be updated now with the current information for the Souk housing statistics from census. At the bottom, Mr. Paolo, future residential demand, is that from the Souk? That's from our housing report?
Yes, a lot of the information regarding employment and housing, it's a mix of StatsCan data as the raw data source, and then as well our housing needs report and our economic analysis that contributed a lot of information, and that's where it provided consistency with our projections by using 2016 data. So by introducing the updated stats, that might throw a bit of a wrinkle into the analysis, which is trying to go back and determine the data that we had already prepared in the past with our housing needs report and our economic analysis. How does it now correlate into this document, knowing that 2016 16 data was suggesting a 2.9% population increase annually. And based on the current 2021 stats, that's just gone up to 3.2. So essentially within that close projection, we're maintaining that same trajectory. It's only gone up 0.3%. So our projections are consistent with the percentage of increase for our population. It's just the total number has changed.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but I still think it has to reflect the most current data that we have available. There's also, I'm wondering how much data we get from the school districts. Is any of their enrollment data used?
I know in past conversations with some of their enrollment data, I heard that it was not, their calculations were not accurate in terms of the actual demand that was generated. So we haven't used any of that data. It's been strictly the StatsCan data, and then working with Colliers International to compile this information.
I see. No, I appreciate that. It just leaves a bit of a gap for me because as we know from when Charters was closed, the impact that the traffic that had on our traffic pattern from just the pickup and drop off was significant. And then it changed once the road reopened even partially. I've heard now that Scia'new school has now hit capacity. Usually a sibling can go to the same school as an older sibling, but in this case, some families are telling me that they can't do that. They went to Scia'new's for the Nature K. They would like their other kid to go there as well, and now they can't meet that because there's obviously growth in that area. But where it impacts us is that it feeds all the congestion on our highways and our main road. Right there. So I don't know, in some ways, I feel it's, how do we capture that, or can we? Or find a way to strengthen that work there, because when Charters does get rehabilitated, which we are planning and intend to do, all of that traffic is now going to be diverted onto Highway 14. Like, you see how intense it was. Councillor Logan.
That's our transportation master plan.
Okay, I just somehow I think that's where it needs the link between the two documents. See, even for me, it's not there, that I can't find that, right? Councillor St. Pierre?
Along those lines, should we reference the housing needs assessment under the this section? Because it's a report that we have that actually should be, putting forward what we need in terms of housing. But the other thing that I note here is that future residential demand doesn't actually seem to take into account the housing crisis that we recognize we have. So I don't know that this is actually particularly accurate. For example, 1,813 residential units could be 1,800 single family detached, but is that actually what the community needs at this point in time in terms of affordable housing units and making sure that our workforce is housed? So I don't know that this is actually providing the information that's actually going to help guide land use decisions, which is what they should be doing, I think.
Sorry, you're referring to page 27 and at the bottom where it says surplus unit demand?
26, actually, future residential. Oh, am I looking at the right thing? It's like, yeah, 26, future residential demand.
Okay.
So it doesn't talk about multifamily or high density or rentals in particular, which we know is what we desperately need in order to actually keep people in Souk, keep workers in Souk, keep young people in Souk, keep people that don't want to commute in Souk. We know that Route 14 is choked up, so we know that's what we need, but that's not actually laid out here anyway.
And I think that's where some of the discussion that I'm hearing is starting to go into the realm of policy discussion, which would then come later on in the community policy section of the document. Right here, we're just trying to paint a very quick picture of what our statistics are suggesting to then inform the policy sections later on in the document. Because I think if we start building too much policy or anticipated demand in this area, then we're really going to balloon the document. We just want to say, here's what the stats say right now. And then when we go and try and justify it later on in the policy sections, we know where that policy is being developed from. It's knowing that we need 1,813 units. In the policy section in our land use map, we're promoting more high density growth, which then speak to the point that you're making.
Would that also be a place where the housing needs assessment you referenced in the policy section?
In certain areas, it might say, you know, in conjunction with a specific plan or suggesting an update to certain areas. I can't say specifically the housing needs policy. I think it might be mentioned in the preamble, but I have to jump to that housing section of the document.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, all we're saying is here's the facts.
That as short as we can do in that section,
Okay.
yes.
Well, that would be good. And also the nature of the type of housing, but I think that what's being suggested here is that's a policy decision that needs to be preferred.
Okay, Councillor Bateman.
So a few more things on these pages, and thank you, Mr. Palau, for that reference. I guess it's 2 years we've been waiting to dive in on this, so taking this opportunity, many things have changed. So I don't know about the rest of you, but this 80 new jobs per year number to me seemed low. If we're aspiring to develop our employment lands, does that feel low to anyone else? Yeah. So, and when I see tertiary employment market, I was wondering, you know, it's secondary sector is light manufacturing, value-added use of raw materials. And these are the sort of things I would have imagined would be established in a service suit business park of the future.
Through your worship and staff, I'm curious about Councilor Pettis. The 80 new jobs, is that straight up a projection based on past trends? Is that the idea?
Yes, most of this data in here is based on those projections, you know, for population growth, age of, you know, working age residents, and then those projections as we go on, as we grow, then you would need X number of jobs then to accommodate that population growth.
Thank you. So, Councilor, I think what's happening here is again the same thing that happened with my question about single family versus multifamily and so on. This is straight up a projection based on historical trends. There's no policy decisions. There's no input from council in terms of trying to change that 80 jobs to something higher. That's just a straight up projection based on historical trends being reported out in this particular area.
And then just to further add, because I know staff feel the same way too, as, you know, trying to get as much detail into this document to explain the story of where we're currently at and where we want to go, is that we have to have some flexibility and confidence that the future plans that we're going to develop, like an employment land strategy, which is one of the action items in this OCP, is also going to address the employment piece. We're going to identify those lands where we need to have employment potential. And then from there, good stat reporting on how many new businesses are being created, how many people are being employed in these businesses. And that all becomes part of that economic indicator of what we're doing in SOUP to support the community as a whole.
So that projection is business as usual, that 80 jobs, new jobs per year, because we're talking about the life of this OCP. So it'd be good to indicate if we continue on this current direction, we'll have 80 new jobs. And if we implement the community economic development strategy and action plan, we could do much better. And then back to the tertiary employment market, I'm curious, any thoughts on whether SOUC is suitable for secondary, that light manufacturing, value-added use of raw materials?
So I think that all comes down to that analysis for our employment land strategy. I think there's a lot of potential. I mean, we have the economic development strategy that's been implemented. So working through that, doing a number of those action items, and then complementing that with the employment land strategy. I think right now what we're just trying to do is set the stage for what we see as a general projection of where we could go. And certainly that's going to change as the community develops in this vision, and we'll seek to update where necessary to provide more clarity, or if the implementation is not proceeding as we envision, to make whatever necessary amendments might be of benefit to the community.
I'll just add, though, that I think this language needs to change to reflect how we're interpreting this. Now, that didn't sound right. If this is meant to be just, this is the data that we had and this is the projection, it should do that, because this part under employment, and I hear what Counselor Bateman is saying now, is under the assumption that the participation rate and employment will remain relatively steady over the life of this OCP, 80 new jobs per year are expected within the district of Sauk. So we implement this OCP, we get 80 new jobs, and it breaks down into these categories. Like, that's not exciting. Right? That doesn't. So that needs to change, because if that's how then I would read it, is that this OCP will create 80 new jobs. It does, so there just needs to be an adjustment there, and I don't have the language, but otherwise that's how that reads. Councillor Logans?
Perhaps we can just change the heading to employment projections, housing projections, population projections to make that a bit more clear. But it does need to have this base data, and if a councillor thinks 80 new jobs is not low enough, that's when you go into the strategic plan with ideas to start changing that and move forward on something like that.
Councillor McMahon?
I think we're like diving into bizarre minutia, and if we just pull back, the OCP is supposed to be this guiding document. And so if we were all right now as a group to say, what are our top 5 issues in Sauk? One of those would be retaining and attracting local employment and business. And I would honestly say, for me, that would be number 1, because it's all tied together with Sauk's biggest detrimental environmental contribution is our traffic. The biggest complaint we hear about, especially right now, is traffic. We aren't going to get funding for a bypass for like at least another 5 years. So the easiest way to tackle that is to bring those commuters back into the community. So one of the pieces, and I think where there's like a bit of a struggle here, is you have staff saying, well, this is what we're going to have, this is what we're going to get, when it's our responsibility to say this is a priority. And so this should be the piece of the OCP. So one of the guiding pieces in this OCP now, not later as a strategic piece, is that this current projection isn't going to fit. So here's what we're going to do to attract those pieces now. So I appreciate that we have statistics there, but one of the components for me that's missing in this OCP is how is Sauk, how is this OCP attracting that business? And it's not here. So that's where some of these issues are coming from right now.
We're gridlocked. I'm stuck on that. It still just doesn't read right. I hear what everyone is saying. It's trying to do both things in this paragraph. So something just needs to change. There's just a piece that needs to come out. That's all. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, so on page 27, I noted estimated units built since 2016. We've got 641. Well, the census states we had 1,181 new units built since 2016. So that kind of miss, you know.
Hold on, where are you?
Big. That's the bottom of page 27 under 2016. Second last line, estimated units built since 2016 is 641. And that's Collier's doing its prediction. And of course, they didn't have the advantage of the census, and I guess we're all surprised at the growth. But the number is in fact 1,181.
For 2016.
No, since 2016 to
since 20.
2021.
Right.
As of the last census.
Yeah, so that's where these will all be updated.
Yeah, okay. Yes. Okay.
Because
Bear
it's
in
what
mind,
was
this
available at the
is-
time.
This is all put together a year
Before,
ago.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah, I think the staff can update those.
Broad community engagement. I'm on page 28. We on page 28?
I like that photo.
The text should probably be below the photo box. if possible, if there's a way to do that, because you can't read it. I don't know how it shows up. Like, it's hard to read it both digitally or in print form. But that's just with the pictures that should be there. And then the bottom two are the Celebrate Sioux community events. So maybe in the paragraph, it should also reference community events. Because there was presences at night markets, Saturday markets, community, you know, all of that, but that part isn't there. So the pictures don't match that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not a big deal here, but it's part of what makes a colorful document. And, you know, that OCP engagement took place at John Muir Elementary, local coffee shops, on Whiff and Spit, all over the place, you know. And when you look at that, I know it's not necessary here, but just to note that there was an awful lot of work went into a COVID era OCP engagement process. And of course, again, there's electronic links to from this OCP into the wealth of other documents, I trust.
Well,
Such
that's what
as-
we're asking. That's what we want to see
Yeah.
is those links to the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think they're there right now.
I'm getting the
But they didn't
gimlet
work for
eye.
me, so I'm assuming they're not there.
No.
There is no links to anything. Mr. Schaefer?
And your worship, I think the suggestion about hyperlinks in the text on the internet is a good one. This is the draft.
Yeah.
So I, just to remind council that this is a draft document.
Yeah.
So,
No, I'm aware of that. I was just, Counselor Bateman just wanted to confirm. It seemed, I read that.
Yeah.
Trusting they're there, but they're not because it's a draft.
Yeah, oh, in due course.
Yes. Okay, anything on 28, 29, turning the page? 30. So this may change, well, it's hard to say. This is coming to the CRD's planning committee this Wednesday for the alignment piece, so. Yeah, and then it'll follow up to the board and come back to us. So this may change depending on what that process does. I think it's just, we don't know because it hasn't happened yet.
I heard good news from at the staff level that they liked what was written, but obviously it has to go through the higher levels with the board and the committee. But overall, when staff did their review at the CRD level, they said that all their recommended changes made sense when we corrected the document, and they were pleased with that, so that they could at least have something to support to the committee.
I do have it here. I was just going to. There was 2 comments, just so that since we're on the page here. It does have a recommendation for the committee to the board that the District of Sioux Regional Growth Statement be considered in relation and be accepted in accordance with the Local Government Act. Within the staff report, there was just something I picked up here. It just says here, so the way it talks about the regional growth strategy implications. The proposed RCS demonstrates a strong relationship to the RGS that will work towards achieving the regional growth strategy vision and objectives based on CRD staff analysis. Captures all relevant OCP content and so forth. It goes on, the RCS identifies that these RGS policies will be achieved by focusing commercial and residential growth within the town center core, town center waterfront, which are part of a sub-regional node in the regional growth statement settlement concept. It says here, Sioux elected to pursue a narrative approach that does not include specific policy citations, references in the RCS, which is noted in Appendix B. The regional context statement framework recommends that an RCS be as specific as possible in terms of clearly articulating all relative content. Without such policy references, the RCS is less specific than recommended. with the new OCP, it does sort of goes on, but they still recommend to endorse that. So it's just something that I noted, but I'll ask questions about. I don't fully get that piece there. But the report is live and it's on the CRD's website if you wanted to look at it. So that'll then come probably to the June or July board meeting. June would be a bit quick, I think, but we'll see. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking these electronic links will save a lot of paper and space and keep this thing distinct. So on that page 30, could we have an electronic link to Local Government Act Section 428, which describes the purpose of a regional growth strategy?
So to add that.
Add that link, just simply. And then I wanted on page 33 to bring up correspondence received from Farrell Estates regarding the new section in the box. In the gray area on the page 33. And they're in several letters we've received from them. They would like us to clarify the meaning and intent of this revision. And that sentence being, new service systems will be considered as part of managed growth to new undeveloped areas. And their question is, what is meant and intended by this, by the proposed new systems? And they're concerned that the wording will further limit the potential for Farrell Estates to continue. So I asked that.
So new service systems are related to water, sewer, anything required to service undeveloped areas of land. So as we made the changes to the document on the land use map to include Farrell Estates as a community residential area, now they would come forward with their sewer serviceability report indicating that those lands could be serviced, and then they would provide the necessary water and sewer lines to develop those areas subject to a rezoning application, subdivision, development permit, so forth as part of that process. So what it's talking about is just considering all aspects of managing those areas of growth and densifying areas where existing systems currently exist is good asset management, because we're not spending more money to extend out into other areas. We can do that, but looking at the whole life cycle cost and growth as a municipality, what makes the most sense financially? And that comes into considering our financial plan and what are we doing to manage that growth.
Okay, thank you. That seems very straightforward. So a new service system is not anything other than an extension of an existing service.
Extension, new built, I mean, anything that is going to service an area must extend to something. It must connect into our system. So you would be extending your water lines, sewer lines, whatever the case might be. The only time that it would be a fully independent, dedicated new system is if you're doing something like in the Silver Spray area. They would have their own plant out there, usually typically a strata type development where that's all kept locally within that site. It's not connecting into an existing system elsewhere.
So hopefully we'll hear from Mr. McPhail again if indeed that explanation did not satisfy him. Thank you.
Just to follow up to Councillor Bateman's question, why do you think they are asking for clarity? Where do you think that concern is coming from? Like if you were in their seat, what is the perspective, or what is it that they're concerned about in the wording of this?
I can only assume that council, as the decision-making authority on any new developments that come forward for rezoning and development permits, if it has to come to council, you can make that decision based on policy. So if a developer or anybody asks for specific policies that guarantees them certain privileges that aren't available to somebody else, then that would require future councils to make decisions based on those policies. And I think really what we have to look at is each application process independently and the needs of the community and manage that growth accordingly. So we've had letters written in that say we want our development permit number included as an exemption for something specifically so that they don't have to go through. And that's not I don't know any OCPs where I've seen those specific references made. Each council must make a decision based on the policies of the day and what's in the best interest of the community. So I think I can only assume that a developer is just looking for specific wording that might provide them some specific guarantees. And I don't think that's really something that we can provide those types of guarantees. Council is going to make the decision that's best as of that day.
So what's the biggest difference from the previous OCP and this OCP that would cause them concern?
I can't really see much now, given that we've reverted that rural residential designation back to community residential. That was probably going to be the biggest piece. And council heard from those property owners and made the decision to keep it status quo in terms of the land use designation.
Thank you.
Okay, so 34, page 34, page 35, still all in the regional context there. Page 36. It's our boardwalk, and 37. It's interesting when just an observation, when I see cradle used as a word, it also implies movement. Like when you cradle, a cradle has rockers on it and it moves. Like, and when you cradle a child or cradle something, it's usually a swaying movement. Like I can't even stop moving as I say the word, because so it's just, I don't know, maybe that's why it jumps out to me, but is cradled always the right word? Because it is. That's true. So I'm just looking for the context.
Cradle just means contained, like
I know, but a cradle is a deliberate,
that's a, yeah.
it's not a chair, it
Different
has rockers
definition
on
of
it.
cradle.
And you move, like you can't hold a baby still, like you're always moving. That's why mothers are always moving around. Just, I don't know. Okay, I'll leave it. Looking in it too deep. Mother Earth doesn't care if we're here. Well, I'm stuck with it. Find it odd. Okay,
I've been working on this for 2 years, so it's entertaining for me.
we were told to stay out of the process until it came to us, and then the heavy work begins. So we're doing the heavy work. I don't know why
Yeah, I
it
just,
would be fast.
I
can appreciate where you're coming from,
But I've
but
heard a lot of these arguments, you know, a year and a half ago. But you haven't, so I understand that. And we'll get through it, but it is going to take some time, and it's okay. We've got through what, 34 pages already?
Councillor St. Pierre,
Just a request for another hyperlink to the CRD's complete communities criteria. That's all.
So I just pulled up a definition of cradle. It means to hold gently and protectively, or place a phone receiver in its cradle.
it's all on the reader. That's what I'm saying. It's just different. Okay, OCP policy structure. Okay. Bit of a target. That's how I look at that. I'll leave it alone. OCP vision. There's cradled again. Oh, get over it. Council, maybe, for sure. 40, page 40, page 41. This probably, go back a page. To what number
page
page?
40.
Yes,
And it's just that final line, it says to bring to life this vision, goals and objectives. So it's actually to bring to life this vision and these goals and objectives.
excellent. Page 41. So here's where, do we have some updated information on this, or is this the latest data set from the CRD? For 2018? If it is, then it is what it is, but and then if you link it, then that's what people will find. So that needs to be updated for 2020. And the 2015 Paris Agreement? That's
That's a big one.
that's where we're still there. Okay, let's check it. Counselor St. Pierre.
All right, going back to page 38 on the foster a resilient food and agriculture system. I think it's actually the job of the ALC to preserve the farmland, but it should be maybe our focus to use the farmland and to enhance the use of farmland.
Okay, just wait, let us.
Yep.
You're on page 38.
First paragraph, third line. Key objective in the OCP is to preserve and use agricultural lands. The ALR and the ALC basically take care of the preservation piece pretty effectively. They're so well preserved that we can barely use them.
On page 38, why can't I see it?
Am I not? It looks like page 30. Hang on a sec. Oh, sorry, page 35. I'm looking at the, there's two different paginations here happening. Just
Okay. Page 35 under foster resilient food and
Third.
agricultural system,
Third line.
third line down.
Key objective in the OCP is to preserve and use agricultural land. And then it recognizes that, you know, most of the land is in the ALR and that has about 3.1%, so on and so forth. But I think most of us realize that the ALR does a good job preserving. And we don't need to really worry about preservation, but we do have to actually put a lot of effort into the usage and what we can do to enhance usage of agricultural lands.
So what is the change you'd like to see?
I'd like to see preserve taken out so that so that use can be emphasized.
Okay, a key objective in the OCP is to encourage
Encourage the utilization of agricultural lands in Souk.
encourage the utilization.
For food production, if we want to be specific, because it could be kind of scary otherwise.
Well, that again is out of our control. That's up to the LC. It deems it farming.
No, I think
So,
what we're talking about here, agricultural production versus putting on a suburb or something like that.
right.
Usage could be many things. In this case, we're hoping for some sort of agricultural.
No, I get it, but let's just, OCP is to encourage the utilization of agricultural lands. So, okay, Councillor Beddoes, that was good, eh?
Well, I disagree,
Oh.
because the way the system is, I understanding is working now. If somebody with some ALR land, they want to take it out, come to us first, and then it goes. So are we looking at making it a little bit of a hurdle for those people to do that? That's way to preserve our objective is to try and preserve as much agricultural land as we can, unless they make a really good argument. So that's why I think the preserve is in there. You know, it's just a small point, but I think it sends a big message as this council, this OCP, is that an objective that we want, to preserve agricultural land? I've heard in the last 3.5 years it is. So that's why I would prefer it stayed in, but
No, that makes,
it's not a big roughie on it. I don't care.
that makes a lot of sense. I'm just concerned because, like I said, the preservation is being taken care of. Meanwhile, barely any of our land is being used. Obviously, our policies are really going to have to focus on the utilization. Otherwise, we just ignore it. Because
I'm not so sure the ALR is doing that great of a job. I looked at a certain stretch in Langford there that came out of the ALR, which was a really nice field. And I don't know what the logic was behind it, but yeah, I don't quite share that ALR policy. But
We'll, Okay to leave it alone? Okay. Good discussion. Okay, our vision forward, page 37. And then we're looking at over to 41. We're on page 41. Counselor Logans?
On page 41, paragraph. I'll even jump you over to 42 next. Paragraph 4, it states figure 6, but figure 6 does not, it's not, it doesn't say figure 6 anywhere. We've got figure 5 to the right on the same page, but I believe it's supposed to reference the unnamed, unnumbered figure on page 42. Or perhaps 43.
Good catch. So we need to,
Just note which one
yeah,
is figure 6.
either add, if it's been missing, it needs to come in, or it needs to be numbered, one or the other.
And that may all come to light with Counselor Bateman's suggestion of adding that figures table. It may, there may be others that within the same situation, but
Yeah, good catch. Counselor Bateman, you likely have some.
Yeah, I initially it was all about why are we not stating categorically here the district has declared a climate emergency? Sort of my new thinking on this document, as educated by the rest of you, we need to keep this tight. This ideally there will be a electronic link to, if indeed it's approved, the climate action plan that will be presented to council in later July, I believe it will be. I think there's some confusion over what is net zero. And we've heard this from a few people at the OCP open, I did anyway, from the OCP open house and in correspondence. And this is a good definition to the degree in the opening paragraph states through the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, you could continue there from the atmosphere by oceans, soil, forests, and the environment at large. And that comes out of the UN definition. So we're talking here about sequestration. And that word is not used on this page, and it's an important one. So I'd like to see by oceans, soil, forests, and the environment at large added to that.
And that's a UN definition.
UN
So that could
definition.
then be linked to that actual source.
Yeah. So you could in fact put the exact UN definition, or the federal government's Canada's climate plan has a definition, as do many authorities.
I would
Just
think
do a
that it
verbatim quote.
should be a federal Canadian definition.
Sure. So I
And
can
then
send
noted.
Ms. Temple the link to that.
Knowing it might change. One would be likely not to, but it's just, I don't know, every election, something changes, the language changes somewhere, right? And then we're stuck with it, but it'll be as current as it is. It's fine, same idea. Counselor St. Pierre.
I was going to mention the graphic on page 38. So the many circles within. If we wanted to actually provide a flow chart, that would be a good place to put it.
Yeah.
You could just fire in, where the budget process happens, generally speaking, where the strategic plan happens, and how the various elements flow into each other. And that would work out beautifully in this particular graphic.
Okay, see what that looks like.
Oh, just actually one more thing different. We are a compassionate community. It's something we can be proud of. It seems to relate strongly to Souk as a small town with a big heart. I was wondering if it might make sense to weave it in somehow. Souk is a compassionate community with a big heart, or I don't know. In the actual OCP vision statement, I haven't actually found compassionate community mentioned anywhere, and it should be.
So instead of small town,
No, instead of small town, compassionate community. But I think my main point is just to mention it somewhere. What it is some.
Just some context, we've kicked that one around and around. And what you see is what we came up with in the end, but we certainly tackled that question. So there you go.
I tend to agree with Councillor St. Pierre on this because small town by the provincial definition, or even through the Union of BC municipalities, is a community of 5,000 or less. And we're deemed to be a mid-sized community. So just having, you know, gone through that, we don't fit the small town criteria even in a provincial context. We're small compared to Vancouver, but we're not a small town. When you all go to UBCM in September, you won't be allowed into small talk community forum. Just saying. Mr. Pello, even grants, all of that, we don't fit the criteria for it.
Yes, and I think this was a challenge that we had throughout this process, trying to write a document that legislatively made sense and complied with terminology, regulations, and the like. But at the same time, the public's view of what certain words meant and the character that they were trying to capture. And so I think you've narrowed in on one specific example where legislatively, but also the feeling, the vision, the thought that the community had they're two different things. And so how do we kind of rectify those two and
But
bring
we
it?
are a compassionate community. We have the sign, we've made the declaration. And then Councillor McMath?
Mr. Pello is hitting on exactly what I put my hand up for in the first place. It's not technically sure, but what is it when people think of Souk? That's a slogan. It's not a factual or some data reference. It's just that's the slogan for what, as we grow with our OCP, we still want to maintain that feeling or that character or like that soul. So we grow massively, sure, but the essence of Souk is something we still want to retain. And that's where I think this is more of our slogan. You could even put it in quotations if.
Like small town. Some would argue that that is gone. Like others you talk to would say, it's all who you speak with would say, we abandoned that 10 years ago. So it's so subjective. And I can just appreciate where you're coming from, Councillor Meadows. I agree with, I still like what Councillor St. Pierre said, but anyway, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, so there's a few things there. In the preamble, which is an amazing piece of work, by the way, by that committee, right? In lieu of an executive summary, they came up with this document. The first message we heard is a strong desire to maintain and enhance the unique character of Souk. Residents want to maintain Souk's small town feel and its unique wild by nature character. So small town feel, I agree, it's a t-shirt slogan.
Yeah.
And a great kind of, yeah, we can still be a small town even as we grow. So, and back to the compassionate piece, I was attending some of those OCP committee meetings via Zoom, and compassion was in there early, but then it was replaced wisely because compassion is a bit misunderstood by some. So it is the final line is a caring community where people and the environment are treated with dignity and respect. Seemed to be a really good line. But I agree with Councillor St. Pierre, we need to highlight that we're a compassionate community elsewhere in the document somewhere.
So we're leaving it alone? All right. Okay, we've dealt with 41 and 42.
No, we haven't dealt with 42.
Okay,
Because here's an interesting moment, and the Climate Action Committee, came up last year with a recommendation that council bought in on was the 50% by 2030. And I've struggled with this quite a bit. And initially I thought, well, why isn't this OCP following the letter of what council requested? But I've come to understand that this OCP is the big aspirational document, and that Souk, the district, is in fact trying to beat these numbers via the Souk 2030 campaign and the 7% solution and the climate action plan, the low carbon resilience, all these good things that we're attempting to do. So good to have the provincial figures in this document, but I think it would be good here to indicate, and there is text in the phase 3 engagement summary that does explain the planning department's thinking on why they've stuck with this. Where is it here? Ongoing work, quote, ongoing work by the District of Sauk in the development of the 7% solution aims to direct community-based solutions by achieving a greater reduction by 2030. So I can see that the two could coexist. Does that make sense? I would like to see, in addition to these greenhouse gas reductions targets, a statement of intent that the District of Sauk over this next decade does intend to work towards this 7% solution approach to reducing GHG by 50%.
But doesn't that come through the low carbon resilience document though?
Through the climate action
The
plan.
climate
yes.
action
So we
package,
need
though,
to
like
again,
that's where the link needs to be,
Yeah.
is that work does exist. And it's creating that link from this to that,
Yeah.
so that as that work evolves and updates and changes, it's all relevant. So I don't think it needs to be in here, because it's just maybe where it refers out to that other work, maybe is what could be added there. Because that's where that work was developing, as this work was in a draft form. It wasn't quite ready yet, but then it will be. And one's to point to the other. No? Yes? Maybe so. Good? Go ahead.
Councilor Bateman said he understood, why the 7% policy framework wasn't put in here. I was curious, just from staff, what the rationale was, because I'm not clear myself. It seems like we've got it in place at this point. Obviously, it's not something the community has put forward. Like, we didn't have 2,000 people come forward and say, let's put in a 7% solution. So maybe that's the answer. But I was just hoping to maybe get a sense of why is it we're not using a higher aspiration? I mean, obviously, the OCP is meant to be aspirational. We might not make that 50%. I sure as hell hope we do. But it's aspirational anyway, so I'm curious.
Mr. Powell?
We were looking at across the document, what are our minimum requirements? What are other plans that already set specific directions? And in this instance, knowing that there's other work occurring within other departments and with other community members, like the 7% solution, and then ultimately the climate action plan, those aspirations, those objectives could be met through that aspect. What we were doing was meeting provincially what the requirements were for our greenhouse gas emissions targets. And by stating them that we would meet those requirements and be legislatively correct. And then if we were to achieve anything above and beyond that, that would likely be through the assistance of the 7% solution and any other plans that we develop in future. I mean, we're just taking one document as we're aware of right now, but there might be other developments in the years to come that address these climate action initiatives. And so we kept it general, recognizing that a lot can evolve over the next coming years. But statistically speaking, here's what we're saying we're going to do to get to net zero. And ultimately, we all have the same objective by 2050 to get to that point of where we're a community at or approaching net zero. It's just between now and 2050, what are we doing? And I think that's where those more detailed plans are going to suggest how we get to 2050.
Okay. Good.
Yes, just so that we could, Mr. Pallow, if you could rewind the tape and have a look at that and get a paragraph, much as you've just stated, into this document. I'm sure a lot of people, including my colleagues on the Climate Action Committee, would be reassured that their work has been respected.
I'm sure I'm going to be doing a lot of rewinding after tonight.
Okay, good.
Councillor Lajeunesse?
Yeah, just can we not just do as we've done and refer to the climate action plan instead of trying to rewrite this like
Yeah.
we're doing with the
It
transportation?
needs language in there to direct it out, that's all.
As per the Local Government Act, we must state specific targets when developing the OCP. So this would be meeting that legislative requirement. And then our action plan actually sets forth the actions we're going to take to meet those targets in more specific detail.
Councillor Logans?
Another piece to that is that the links that we're embedding in this document, it's probably better for us to include general links to here are our policies, here are our reports, because if we're including in these statements that are general statements for an overarching OCP, the exact names of documents, it's going to be outdated within a year. We have to remember this could be around for 10, 20 years. So it has to be updatable. The links that we link to should be ones that we can update as things change.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's just so that it's easy. It's just, I know our website is being looked at and it's very clicky right now to find things. So, but that's where it just, I would agree with you. It just has to take you not just to our SUC homepage. It needs to at least take you to a place where you can find it fairly fast. You know. And it should be, if it's a policy, it's a policy. If it's a bylaw, it's a bylaw. So if it's referring to zoning, it should go to the bylaw section. It shouldn't just take you to the general table of contents. It should at least take you a little bit closer. I think so. Page 44 is where I am right now. Councillor Bateman. Yeah.
43, and the final line in that on that page, the remaining emissions in 2050 after OCP emissions reduction actions can be addressed through agricultural and solid waste diversion and treatment sectors. Now, there's no reference to alternative energy or solar uptake, or I'm curious about that. Is that a common, I don't know. It seems like a strange line to me.
The whole sentence kind of reads a bit. The remaining emissions in 2050 after OCP emissions reduction actions can be addressed through additional actions, primarily in the agriculture and solid waste diversion and treatment sectors. I see. Okay.
Don't understand.
It's a bit, does it need to be there? It's hard to sort of think of, okay, we've done all this and then 2050, we have no idea what's.
I think what I was just trying to say that during this process of GHG reduction, the elements of agricultural solid waste diversion and other treatment sectors could potentially be that remaining 10% to get to net zero. That might not necessarily be all part of that implementation period over the next 20, 30 years for this document, because we're talking about the solar and other renewable energy sources and things like that. These are kind of the areas that don't have as much attention. I mean, we can see about maybe making that wording a little bit clearer, because it's kind of that last sentence to say, hey, we're aware of what's happening at 2050 and here's some areas, but maybe clean up the language there a little bit more.
Okay.
Good, okay. It's 8 o'clock and I noticed some councillors, do we want to take a recess at this point? Yes? Okay, so let's synchronize our mobile devices of all sorts, 8:03, and be back at 8:13, 10 minutes for a health and wellness check. Okay, thank you.
And we do
So
have
22
functioning
pages an hour.
facilities now, if anybody needs to use the facilities.
Yeah, being there. Yeah. Mm.
Oh,
Yeah, they're interesting. Not a word about the First Nation. Not a peep. So that has changed.
Okay, everyone, we're back. So we'll continue on we're on page 44. The one that jumps out for me is under goal area 3, equitable and respectful. Number 2, it says keep Souk affordable, provide housing choices for all. Is it affordable now? Like when something says like keep Souk this. So you were talking when I was speaking, but that's okay. Page 44, goal area 3, number 2, keep Souk affordable, provide housing choices for all. Like it's very subjective. So is keep Souk affordable? Like anything that says keep this, if it. Because. Yeah, that's on a different page though, but that was my other, is it there too? Okay. 2.2. Keep it public, like it isn't now, so except for where we have park spaces. So is there something different we can put in there, or
Are we still talking about goal area 3, item 2?
or both, like both of them being
You
it's
just
the
need to
same
put
thing?
provide housing choices for all. Just keep out the affordable thing, because affordable is what's affordable to me may not be affordable to Ebony or something like that. Is there?
Yeah,
What is it, you know?
30 per the CHMC would be that 30% should be the maximum you spend on any form of housing, whether that's rent or mortgage or whatever, and that would be true affordable housing. But I don't think that is something, we don't have that right now. The affordable housing. But my point is, it's not, so I think it should just come out and provide housing.
Choices for all. I'm
Yep.
okay with that.
Okay, and then what about on number 2, goal area 2.2, protect and connect physically and visibly with the waterfront, the soul of Souk, keep it public,
Just strike, keep it public.
take it out. Well, we have access to the public through the dedicated access points that are available now, like there was several through subdivision or whatever process, there's an access point that we all have. I mean, whether we know where they all are or the condition of them. So that's another policy area piece, but I think for now that could come out too. Yeah, there's certain,
But it says protect and connect physically and visibly with the waterfront. But doesn't that do the same thing?
so I think keep it public could just come out.
I had a question around goal area 1.4, and that is, how do we define high performing infrastructure? Is that an item we could put in the glossary? Not sure what high performing infrastructure. It's like,
What would be the measure of that, Mr. Paolo?
I think the intent with the committee, this is 2 years worth of memories. Trying to recall with this one, the high performing component, I think really talks about durability, usage, that it's of quality and it's a asset that can be maintained. And then the delightful piece is kind of that component of it's not, but yeah, visually appealing. It's not too industrial looking, you know, it fits in with the scale of the community.
That's how I remember the conversation too, vaguely.
so do you think a glossary item on that would be worthwhile? Not necessary?
high performing really boil down to durable?
Durable would be
So we could go.
comparable.
And alliteration would be durable and delightful.
No, I would leave it alone because, and the example that comes to mind with this council was when we were talking about doing the sidewalks along Highway 14, sort of from the town core to Ed McGregor. And we had the discussion of whether or not we continue with the attractive pavers or if we go to the more durable, boring kind. And we decided to stay with the pavers, because they were more aesthetically pleasing or delightful. So if we put in durable, like, just saying, so I think it's
You
fine.
remember
as it
different,
is.
it was a compromise and we did some of the paving stones that still did a lot more on the brush concrete.
That's right, the brush concrete.
so
But
there
it
it was,
wasn't,
eh?
it wasn't just boring though, like
Oh,
we
no.
made it attractive.
I had a lot of compliments about that sidewalk, very necessary.
But so it's both.
I had the same, I made note of the same point as Councillor Bateman. I just thought that high performing, at least to the public, when we have to ask Mr. Paolo what it means, I don't think the public's gonna understand what this means. And so I have a concern with that.
But in the end, it's who's using this documents. Like it's going to come in where it, and it's anyone that does anything like land altering. So is where this may kick in. The general public, I don't think would read it in the way that we're reading it or view it in that way. It really is a land use document when it comes to dealing with land use matters.
I absolutely agree. And at the same time, we have language that's ambiguous. And the public can come back and say, well, this is what it means, at least to me. And we haven't made it clear, so they're not wrong.
They aren't, but then that'll get hashed out in a council meeting. So what'll happen is a future council will need to deal with sidewalks and we're going to have a range of, okay, you can continue on with these pavers or brush concrete or stamped concrete and it'll cost this much. Or you can do this or this or this. And in the end, no, we'll make that determination, right? Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, so under item 5, we have expand and protect parks and green space. Now, in the glossary, there is a word carbon sink. And interestingly, carbon sink is not in the OCP at all. I did the search, I couldn't find it. But I think it might be useful to put it there. A line like expand and protect parks, green spaces, and carbon sinks throughout the community for the well-being of current and future generations. So I'd like to see carbon sinks added to that. That was a recommendation coming out of climate action committees.
But how does green space and carbon sink differ?
Well, a green space typically might be seen as a park. A carbon sink is salt marsh or a forest. Or
I'm not sure the average citizen know what a carbon sink is. So
well, that's why it's in the glossary. Yeah. So yeah, what does it say there?
They're natural systems, plants, soils, aquatic, marine environments that absorb more carbon from the atmosphere than they release. They're vital to maintaining Earth's carbon balance and can help meet GHG reduction targets. Councillor St. Pierre.
I would normally be all over, anything that actually really helps out in terms of the climate, but I suspect that putting this in here would create a lot of very complicated questions that we couldn't necessarily answer. So for example, protecting all carbon sinks, every blade of grass is potentially a carbon sink, every bush is a carbon sink. Where does it exactly, like, how do we leave parameters on this one? I think if we're protecting and enhancing all carbon sinks, then essentially we're not putting any buildings, we're not putting any roads, because every time we do, we're taking out a carbon sink. Nature is a carbon sink. And we're actually building a community for people to live in. So there's going to have to be a balance, but I'm concerned about including all that in one statement because I think it could really mess us up bad.
I would agree with that. Page 45. Moving into 46 and page 47. 47 just has one that needs to change now in the middle, and it's the piece around the goals: protect and connect physically and visibly with the waterfront, the soul of Sioux, keep it public. So I think that line just needs to come out so it matches. I appreciate the intent. but- Yeah, no.
Sorry, on page 47, where it says provide equitable access to parks. I think page 50 has a similar language, but it doesn't really describe what that means. And so I thought that adding something like provide adequate parking for people with disabilities where possible, minimize grades on public pathways. And that would provide equitable access to parks.
Counselor Logans?
That does provide equitable access to parks. However, our district's definition of equitable will change through time. So at one point, it may be that we need to have more wheelchair access to parks or more parking to parks. At another point, it may be we need parks in this new development area because it's closer for people to walk safely and take their children there and not have to drag them across town. So the definition of equity is going to change based on the needs of the day.
I have a related question or concern with page 45, last point. Align economic activity with climate and equity goals, but equity goals are not necessarily defined. And I'm not really sure what that would mean. Page 45, last bullet.
45, last bullet.
I'm not sure what aligning economic activity with climate and equity goals, exactly how that would work. In some ways, I think the first one, encourage a diverse and thriving local economy that respects ecological limits, that's covered. Aligning economic activity with climate, you're respecting ecological limits, so that's covered. But the equity goals, without some kind of definition of, and as Councilor Logans has pointed out, that definition can shift and change. So I'm not really sure how that particular bullet works in terms of actually providing guidance. No, go ahead. It's just pointing out.
I would say to leave it activity with climate goals. If we agree with Councillor St. Pierre, because this bullet is specific to those items. I also agree. I don't quite understand where that fits.
Just to add, is that to address the needs of the equity seeking groups, which is defined in this document as being those who face discrimination or other forms of systemic disadvantage, include but not necessarily limited to persons of color, persons with disabilities, Indigenous people, 2S LGBTQIA+ individuals, and women.
And that's
So-
where Councillor St. Pierre's note of the fourth bullet up, equity may fit better in that piece where it speaks of a diverse, thriving local economy. It just doesn't, to me at least, it doesn't quite make sense in that last bullet.
My only interpretation of that, I hear what you're saying there, is that you could do that, but if you leave out the equity piece, then you could leave people behind. That's, no? Oh, in a different bullet on its own. Okay. that respects ecological limits and the needs of equity seeking individuals or something like that. Ecological, yeah, so then it doesn't leave people behind. And then it's captured, and then the ones at the bottom could, it's all sort of fits together as different pieces. Okay.
I think you could have a just easier statement, encourage a diverse, thriving, equitable local economy that respects ecological limits. And of course, the equity piece here relates to climate justice, of which thereby we recognize that individuals within the community can't always buy in the way others with, anyway. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So can you repeat the one that you said, Councillor Bateman, around the encourage? It
Yeah.
converse a, you meant.
A
you had
diverse, thriving, equitable local economy.
And just strike the last bullet,
Well, it would just say align economic activity with climate goals.
but that's already kind of implied in that other statement, encourage diverse, thriving, equitable local economy that respects ecological limits.
You like the bullets as they are with the change?
I think there's like a bit of a pattern here where to me, it's like a red flag where we have some of the best comprehension out of the community. And we are like struggling here with what does this mean? And like, so it's hard, like, I'm glad we're going through it line by line, but like, my question is why is it written in this way? Because you can tell, like, as we have questions, and then Councillor Beddoes or Mr. Paulo know the context and know what it means, but nobody else is going to know that. And so how do you, how is it fair to give this document to someone who is, like, I would say, beyond a Luddite when it comes to comprehension of this? How are they ever going to navigate this? And I struggle with, why do we have a glossary? Like, there shouldn't be a glossary in this document. It should be plain language for someone who, this is the first time they're cracking an OCP because they just bought a property and they're trying to figure out what they can and can't do. And so, not helpful, but that's just like a perspective that I have right now. And so I don't know, how did we get here? And then how do we fix this throughout this entire document?
We talked about that, just to update you. When we began, it was something that we raised, that when we gave the direction that we were looking for the lean and mean document that just keeps in the minimum of what we have. But then through the process, this is what we have. And so the challenge now is, how do you take all that out without, there's 2 years of work. But then also address it so that it can be this workable piece. And that's the challenge we're having. That's a challenge I have, because then it's like, now I'm diving into minutia and I should zoom out, but the document is pulling me both ways. And that's the struggle.
And it's funny because, like, one person has one interpretation and one person has a completely other. And so if we're having that here, it's going to be tenfold for anybody else.
I think we're all agreeing with you. That's
The glossary at the front of the document.
here's a how to read the document. Oh boy.
I agree with what Councillor McMath is saying. At the same time, I do note that at least a good chunk of the document is fairly straightforward, which is good. But there are some places where, I struggle to understand. If I'm struggling, then I really don't expect most people to know what's going on. So I really do think that ambiguity, if all we do is take out anything that's ambiguous, I'm happy with that. We don't need to fix the language, just take it right out. But leaving in ambiguous language and stuff that's really so complex, or that no one really gets it, except for people that have delved in for 2 years and have professional training, is not, I think, the best bet on a community-derived document.
It's not just like, for me, it's not just the ambiguous pieces. It's like we're putting, we're putting all these hyperlinks in, like, people don't have time for that. And they shouldn't be having to do that. Like, it should be, those links or those pieces should solely be used as an explanation or justification as to where are we getting these stats from. It shouldn't be, hey, here's a 100-page document, check the glossary, and then go do more research on the hyperlink. Like that's not what this document should be. And also for people who don't have access to that, where are they getting the context for these pieces?
Just for clarification, Councillor McMath, are you insinuating the links to the statistical, like where the stats are coming from, or the links to like the transportation master plan and other documents that we create?
I think it's probably easier for someone in the community to get a hold of the transportation master plan. Like if they don't have access to computer, they can come here, that's easier. But as far as like, I feel like there's a lot of sections in here where it's like to give context or to get definitions, they have to go outside, they have to do all this investigating. And if that's hard enough, like I feel like in our age group, and then if they are not tech savvy, if it's their first time dipping their toe in the water, why aren't we using plain simple language? And then the transportation master plan is one piece, but to then send someone on a hyperlink to get a UN definition to understand what this word means, like that is like counterintuitive to the purpose of this document.
So I think the idea of the hyperlinks was only to offer more information on where that came from, not to provide the actual definition, but just to, as you're making a professional document, source your information.
Then it should, in my opinion, it should just be a source at the bottom where this info came from, rather than a hyperlink to send people on another mission, so to speak. I think Councillor St. Pierre was touching on it earlier when we were talking about let's rewind here. Back up to a table and there's a few bullet points below it, and you were referencing that there should be context as to where this like statistical data came from. Just pieces like that. So if someone doesn't have access to go and do that investigating themselves, they know where to find those pieces, or they know that there is justification and education that's gone before to give it credibility.
That's what we are doing though, is just in some cases, we noted that the table or the data set was missing that. So then it was the case, we just need to add it in so that it's all there, but it would still remain there. And that's the source for it to back that up. So they don't need to go and read the other document unless they want to, but this is where it's pulled from. So we have to just give reference to that source information.
We're saying the same thing right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, all right, just checking. Councillor Beddoes?
No, I almost lost it again. It's okay. No, I was just saying when, no matter what document you use, and the Councillor Bateman can attest to this, is when you throw a word in there, like the word cradle, for instance, it means different things to different people. And even when you go look up the definition, the dictionary, it still means different things to different people. Obviously, you have one vision. And that goes through this document time and time again. And I don't think there's any easy way to do it. You have to put some language in there. And if it does get confusing to somebody, that's the nature of this document. Some things are going to make sense. I don't understand everything about the climate change because that's not my area of expertise, not that anything is. But some of it I just have to take on face value. The intent is to do this. And I don't see us changing very much of the intent right now, which is a good thing, I think. So, you know, I just want to be careful about wordsmithing it to the nth degree and change nothing. You know, let's keep going.
Councillor McMath, then Bateman?
Like, I completely disagree with your perspective on that. Like, it's, oh, well, you know, I don't understand this section, but, you know, let's just have faith and move on. Like that is so not our, that's so not our function here. And so where I'm struggling a little bit here is that we're like, we are the most out of the community versed in like these policies and procedures. And we are on page 40 something, and there every section is a question. And so it's not about, I can't remember the words you just used. It's not about getting into it at a ridiculous degree, but it's just calling it out that like we are struggling with comprehension right now. And so it's like, when you say like, you don't understand the climate action section, but let's just have trust and move on. Like,
That's not what I said.
okay, can you clarify?
No, I said the overall intent. I get the overall intent. When you go down to some of the wordsmithing and things like that, you can get lost in the weeds. I know what the overall intent of all these sections are. And when I hear, us changing things around, my first thing, doesn't it change the intent? And I don't think it does. I don't expect everybody to read this document or any other document. I read some of the stuff that staff puts out to me, and I have to go over it 4 times before I comprehend it because it is written for them. But I understand the overall intent, and I think that's what I want to look for personally as a counselor in this document. What are we trying to say to the public here? I don't think most of the public would even bother reading this first section. They're more interested in the things that really affect their day-to-day living, like the 30-meter setback and the 15-meter setback. These are the things that are causing a great deal of confusion. These little word changes and things like that, the overall thing that we got from the public is we're in a climate emergency. We want to make some movement there. And I think we've addressed that. And same with all these other things. I think the basic intent is fine. I'm not sure how confusing it is. I don't think it's very confusing at all. There may be the odd word that somebody doesn't understand, but that's the nature of the beast. I mean, when you're dealing with legal documents, it's even worse. So I don't want to get lost in the weeds with this.
Counselor, I'll come back to you, Bateman, and then St. Pierre.
Well, this is a great conversation. I think I'd like to go back to page 17, where it states who uses it and how. And interestingly, I was looking at I think the legal firm is Young Anderson or something. They did a document on OCPs, and their opening line is something about, something about a lobotomy or a root canal. It's like, okay, now we're going to talk about official community plans. So it states here, it provides guidance for council and staff who need to implement these directions and policies, or consider them, I should say, not implement, consider. And it also states landowners, businesses who reference the OCP when making property and investment decisions, and residents on that. So it's not for the general reader, definitely. And it's not a page turner. It's I lived here for 20 years, and I tried to read the 2010 OCP. And yeah, it's very in depth. But so the key, I think, is what Councillor St. Pierre said, is no ambiguity, please. Previous council would always talk about how the OCP went in, it just did not line up, and there were internal contradictions. So our job here is to ask these questions, clear up confusion, and it's going to take a little bit of time to do that. 22 pages an hour currently.
Counselor St. Pierre.
I think that Councillor McMath's heartfelt plea in mind too is just to keep it simple whenever possible. We do not have to add additional jargon, and we don't necessarily have to have hyperlinks to go to definition text to understand the document. It should stand alone as much as possible. Understanding that it is a professional document for a specific purpose, and it doesn't have to be the next best novel and a page turner. As much as possible, we should be making this accessible. And I think that's what's being said. I think we can all agree on that. So ideally, our wonderful staff will take that away.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Powell.
Yeah, just hearing some of the concern amongst council regarding, the public using this or whoever the user is that's using this information. I think maybe just some quick insight into staff's day-to-day work. Typically, when we have somebody looking to invest in the community or to buy land, build a house, whatever the case might be. We're generally getting those inquiries through our office to help provide for some clarification. It's a very rare circumstance that somebody would open up the OCP, not reach out to district staff and make big financial decisions for themselves. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's very rare just given the volume of inquiries you get week over week. So we will always be there as a resource to the community to help provide clarification when clarification is needed on these types of documents. So there is always that avenue to help after this OCP is adopted and any other bylaws go through a process of adoption.
Councillor McMahon?
I totally appreciate and respect that, but the challenge comes when like this is your work that you are in every single day. And I've seen lots of the responses that staff have given to community questions. And similarly, sometimes like with this document, it's not easily consumed or processed because like how Councillor Beddoes can speak to pieces because he has context, because he has knowledge. So when he speaks to it, for him, it's clear as day, but for other people, it's not. So if you're looking to save yourself and staff work as well, then this should be an ally for you too, so that you don't have community members reaching out, like you said, in large droves to be like, what does this mean? Like that's clearly eating up a lot of staff time as well. So this should be a piece that also assists you so you don't have to tackle those day-to-day responses because there is clarity in this document and simplicity. And going back to another comment there where it's like, you know, you get the intent. It's sometimes like, I feel like there are conflicting messages here because Mr. Paulo spoke to, you know, later on, one of our goals is going to be addressing economic development, so commercial industrial later on. And then one of our biggest goals here is to tackle like our climate emergency. And then we look at this chart here and it's like, it is very evident what our number one contributing factor is to that. So if those two pieces are so tightly woven, when we go back to that other bullet point where our economic development like complements like our climate goals, like I find those pieces are like not in sync in this document either. And I'm sorry, like, I apologize that it's a large document and there's like, I'm not exactly giving you the answer to those pieces. I just want to bring it up. And I know it's a bit of a tedious process, like Councillor Bateman said, it's pulling out root canal and whatever. And so I just wanted to voice those concerns.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Any response from staff?
Certainly, I think we should be able to take the opportunity with council here to provide for those elements of clarity. My comment was mainly what follows afterwards, that we're going to do as best we can to get the document that we feel comfortable taking out to the community and gaining more community support so that council is in a position to adopt the bylaw. And then ultimately what happens afterwards is to have that follow-up piece where clarity can still be provided. Yes, I would absolutely love that the public would understand and digest this, but I know that's just not possible in many jurisdictions. I think every planner would love that, to have that, or anybody that works with bylaws and policies, but I'm sure we can certainly work together to minimize and create more clarity. So agreed.
Yeah, and that's why sort of at the outset was sort of like, okay, the only way to get through this is one page at a time, right? And here we are, and it's just, otherwise we'll be jumping all over the place. At least at the end, we all would have read it. I mean, it is hard to just sit down and read it because it's like, how am I reading this? Like it's, yeah, but it's not a novel. So yes, Councillor St. Pierre.
I'm hoping that we're ready to move on, because I'll move on to another point, if that's okay.
Yes, I'm on page 48. Where
I'm
are
on
you?
page 46, unfortunately.
All right.
First bullet. I'm concerned about, and for the same reasons as the previous comment, protect existing sensitive ecosystems and restore lost or degraded ecosystem functions. So among other things, that could actually include, for example, reestablishing creeks right through neighborhoods and doing a lot of very interesting things in basically areas that we, the town center, that could be right through the town center. I like the idea of protecting existing sensitive ecosystems, but we need to be careful about this because otherwise we're basically saying that we would like to remove the settled areas of soup because that will be restoring degraded ecosystem functions. It's basically
Councillor Beddoes?
Yeah, I think where that comes from, for instance, if a developer, say, Wadham's there, and there's an ecosystem that has been damaged and actually ruined in the past, then staff has the ability to negotiate with that person to restore that ecosystem how it was before. I don't think it's that you can say, okay, every ecosystem must be restored. Otherwise, you rip all these buildings down because that's exactly what will happen. I just think that my understanding of that was the intent of it is that there's some flexibility in there for staff to say, okay, you're putting this development up and we want to extract this benefit and maybe it's restoring that little ecosystem. That's where I thought that came from in discussions that I had. So I don't know if that helps or not, but that's sort of what.
No, that helps a lot. I guess my concern is that, again, if I was just a layperson from the community reading this and feeling really strongly about the environment and climate action, this can go into a very strange sense. So I don't know if this, if boundaries or parameters can be put on it or with more detail in some way, I don't know. I'm just a little concerned about how this might be interpreted by the community.
Councillor Bateman and Logans?
Well, of course, all of these, this section are pointing to the, what is this section called? Anyway, community policies. And so we go to page 92, natural environment policies and actions under objective 4.2.1, of which there are 4 policies and 6 actions. So, you know, that's, and there it is. That puts the parameters and limits on that particular objective.
Yeah.
So I would hate to see too much of this particular section we're working on now revised because there are trickle-down effects that would knock things sideways.
Yeah. Councillor Logans, then Mr.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Bateman. You could, Councillor St. Pierre, you could apply that same logic to every single bullet and say we have to remove it, right? Like you could say the next one or one down is implement the District of Soup Transportation Master Plan. Well, we all know that there are things in that that may not be accomplished for various reasons, but in here it says implement it. So are we just going to implement it? And are we going to do that tomorrow? Or are we going to do that in 20 years? So that level of thinking, again, you need to go into the depth of the document. This is just an objective, and it doesn't mean that it's the be all end all for each one of these bullets.
We're gonna have lots of fun in the policy area. Mr. Palo?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight again, page 38 regarding that policy structure and just kind of bring it back to how this document is structured is also a good representation of how the engagement process went. First, we started off with developing a vision of what we wanted to end up as a community down the road. Then in this following engagement, we then developed goals of how we were going to actually implement this in more detail. And then ultimately, and you see in that policy structure on page 38, those policy actions. And that's where we get into the more detailed piece of what it means to actually implement these components. So it's as you go through the document, you get more detail later on in those sections. And it's really the community policies area. And then also the development permit areas as well, gives more specific guidelines as to how we're achieving this. So community policies and development permit areas is the bulk of the detail for this.
Yeah, I will keep that in mind and I have noted it already. I'm just concerned about stuff like that. And another bullet was establish modal priority. I'd love to have modal priority just defined right in that, just add a few words somewhere to define what modal priority means.
That I flagged that for me, and then it was similar to what Counselor Logan said, is that when we get to that particular policy area, that's where it lays it out in what it actually is. Right? This is just where this is a bit, it's like, oh, what is that? I was looking for the definition. But then when you actually when we get into that, you're going to see what it is. And that's where I think we may disagree on what that looks like. Because it is more, there's more substance to it later on here. Yeah,
This is an overview and a table of contents for the remainder of the document, so that if you just want to quickly see where something fits, you can reference it.
Mr. Schaefer, did you have something?
Not at this point, your worship, perhaps later on, but I think I'm okay now.
Okay, no, I saw your hand and then you left the room. I'm like, oh, what's happening? Okay,
Different issue, sorry.
all right, we'll leave it at that. Thanks, Dana. Okay. Page 49. Right? Yes. So getting into exactly what Councillor St. Pierre, Councillor McGrath is saying, it's the apply an equity lens to planning decisions and resource allocation. In the first, so under the first 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth line down, apply an equity lens. I'm not sure how anyone could do that without significant, like, I think there needs to be a reference, maybe, like, is this talking about the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Because I think it will take some time for anyone to be able to put that lens on. I'm in equitable and respectful on page 49. And in the first set, I guess, the first set of goals, the complementary policy objectives, 1, 2, 3, 4 down, it says apply an equity lens to planning decisions and resource allocation. So I was wondering here, is this, and a lot of it addresses into the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples, but then it's mixing in equity lens. So are we looking to implement the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and then someone will develop an equity lens? But also equity seeking groups are not necessarily Indigenous people. So that's where it's trying to do too many things in one section, and it's not all the same. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I'll just point to page 148, where that particular objective is given 5 actions. And at the top of that page, you see the review and implement applicable calls to action under strengthening relationship with SAUC. So, SAUC.
Sook is not correct. Okay, so this is where I ran into the same, like, this is where this is sometimes the challenge of this document, is because it's here and then, but you need to read more over here. So it kind of speaks to that, but I don't, the only way I think we could change that is if you somehow took, or if you put the relevant policies in the same place. Like, I don't, if you had, this is the goal and here's the policy together, so that you're not going back and forth. But again, I guess it's reading it properly. We're reading it like a book right now.
It's 2 different resources.
I know.
A quick read and a detailed read.
You can always put page references after each goal. So that
Yeah. anyway.
There
Who's
is
next?
nothing wrong with this, but we're reading it incorrectly. So you're reading this section as if this is the end of it. But it is not the end of it because as Councillor Bateman states, there's an entire section that describes what it is.
So I get that, but that's my challenge.
It's not that it's not a challenge. It's just that you have to learn how to read it properly.
Well, I take it as a challenge,
And
then I'm not reading it
Today is
properly.
a good day to learn it so that you can tell the community how to read this as well.
Anyway, Mr. Schaefer.
Not touching that one.
Well, it's just, I don't feel I should, that just seems okay here, community. I'll be on CFAX tomorrow morning and it's like, here's how you read this, right?
The information is in the document.
Mr.
It's not
Schaefer, you're my
conflicting.
next recognized speaker.
And your worship, I think it's like buying a big fancy electric camera. If you try to read the instruction manual first to last, you're going to get nowhere with it. As I found out when my wife bought me a big fancy camera for Christmas one year. You have to, I want to know this. And then you look, you read that and you skip forward. And that is, I mean, that does make it a challenge. I guess the other part of it that makes it a challenge is that this is an overarching policy document as opposed to a document that provides, except in very specific areas, black and white instructions as to what you must or must not do. It's a document that says, here is a goal that we see. And this is what we propose, how we propose to get there. And because of the ephemeral natures of council, that the councilors are elected every 4 years and staff members come and go, this document provides the current council's objectives and goals. And provides for any number of different ways to get to those goals. It doesn't say this is the way we have to go, or this is, if someone comes in with a particular application, there are a number of different aspects of the OCP that will reflect on that application or that direction. So it's not the zoning bylaw, which would ostensibly be next, provides that black and white determination. This isn't a bylaw, it's a policy document. And I would very much like to be able to read them as a bylaw, you know, section 1, section 2, but that's really not how this document is intended to work. It's intended to be nuanced and self-referential to a certain extent, and that makes it difficult to read. And taking out the nuances, might you run the risk of oversimplifying it to provide a very black and white direction. And I'm not trying to, and that's with the greatest respect to the discussions that have taken place, but that's how I see it from an administrative point of view.
Councillor McMath and St. Pierre.
If like I've already said, if we're struggling now, the community is going to drown. And so my question would be, is how do we simplify what we have now? How do we make it so that they don't have to learn how to read it in order to read it and then not understand it and then go to a glossary? Like, how do we simplify this document for people?
And that's a challenge that I think every OCP that I've been involved with has faced, is how do we make it as usable, as user friendly and as usable as possible. And the direction for that comes from council and from the people who are the experts. I'm not an expert in OCPs. I'm an administrator who signs bylaws.
Yeah.
So, well, seriously, this is,
Yeah.
but this isn't a bylaw. It's something, it's a completely different animal and something that you won't see again for another 10 years or so, hopefully. But in terms of how do we simplify it, I'm not sure. It bears thinking about.
Councillor St. Pierre, then I'll go to Mr. Powell.
I think that actually Councillor Bateman's suggestion of putting, page numbers so that you can actually follow the thread. And I think Councillor Logan's made a good point. We're not reading this properly. That's making it very challenging. So we could just change the way we're reading it now. We could actually read a particular goal and then follow through the document to the relevant areas. go through the whole thing, which is exactly what someone going to their camera manual would do. And that's probably what a member of the community will do. What we're doing right now is not what any member of the community would willingly do. Basically starting from the beginning and going through each line of the document. They're going to want to go after certain things potentially and then follow through. So that's what we should do. And that'll give us a better sense of what their experience will be and probably make it a lot easier to deal with this.
Or I think it's just recognizing that, and I think as we get into the other phases, this confusion is going to disappear. It should. It's going to do one or the other.
Let me
I just, like, it's 9 o'clock, so I don't want to switch how we're doing it, because let's just kind of keep turning if we can just keep turning the pages at 9, and then I think we need to call a time when we're going to wrap it up. But the page numbers is a good one. I think that's a good one, and that'll help. Oh, right, it's this, because, yeah, Councilor McMahon.
I just have a question about the OCP process. So what was the order of how this was created? So who created like the list of what didn't work in the last OCP? What are we looking to establish in this OCP? And what out of that list of things is our priority? Where did that list come from?
So staff initially identified what were challenges identified based on the previous or the currently adopted OCP. And then also other items that we've seen just through general application processing. The committee members also contributed to areas of clarity that they were seeking. And then the consultants worked on the background report to identify those aspects and then kind of help shape what we have now as a document. So it's a collaborative effort amongst the committee members and staff. And then also as we went through the engagement process, there was feedback from the public as well. What they like, what they didn't like. They didn't cite specific sections of the OCP, but they at least pointed us to topic areas that were of concern that we can then work with the committee to understand in more detail. So what happened was we developed these sections kind of from the beginning of the OCP to the end as part of that engagement process, doing the visioning, the goals, the policy development. Development permit areas is a little bit more technical. So that's where staff weighed in the most on that, because we were processing the applications, conversations with the development community about here's what they see and what they don't see. And then a lot of back and forth with the committee. There's a lot of items that were in the document that were removed and a lot of items that were added to the document that weren't initially there based on committee feedback. So how you see the structure weighs in a lot with the input from the committee members as to how they saw readability of the document and what they thought would help assist with the reader. So I think what we're experiencing is different groups of people reading this with different background knowledge and then different understandings. And how do we filter this out into the most understood format in this document? And I think that's what we're trying to achieve right now.
So I think like this is also where like we are at this stage as well, is so staff made like the base choices about what they saw as issues and what they saw as priorities and where they were having difficulty or where they felt they were hearing from the community. And then it went to the OCP to committee to review, where in my mind, it's that the community sets the goals and the priorities and the vision for this document. The committee is the liaison for that and communicates those and is a conduit for that. And then staff and the consultants go with the technical pieces. And I think what's been challenging, and maybe it's just for me personally, but I find now instead of us being engaged in a part of like that vision, I feel like now I'm trying to gain all this technical knowledge so that I can help redefine what I wish for the goals to start with. And so I'm just like, I find like it was just done like in a different order. Like I would have expected like the OCP group to be the conduit for the community, to be a reflection of the community, and same with us. Like I wish that we were involved more, not to lead it, but to be the reflection of that community, to set those goals and then have staff and the consultants work out the technical pieces to see that vision come through.
That I think that's, and perhaps Councillor Beddoes can weigh in on this as well, but that is, I think what I was trying to say did happen. The committee was the one who had a bunch of questions that we were to go out and ask the public. We had the surveys and all the other pieces of information that's contained in the background and engagement reports that said, what do you like? What don't you like, community? And the community weighed in. And so the community informed the process of, here's what our vision is, here's what our goals are. And then the committee got into the details of it. Okay, these things make sense, these piece well together. And now we're going to frame it in a specific context of what it makes sense for crafting an OCP. What staff did initially was just identify, here are concerns that we have currently within our existing OCP. So we need to have some conversation and get this out into the public realm as well. So that supplemented the other public component as well. It took
So on
all
that-
aspects.
On that piece there, then like with the setback. So what was the communication and connection with those group of property owners?
The communication with those property owners.
Yeah, so
on the
say like, for
setbacks?
example, like the 30-meter setback, it's like the spiciest
Mhm.
topic so far. So you're talking about, you've gone out to the community and asked them what they're looking for, but then like, we're still getting emails now tonight about confusion for the setback. And so we made a motion, and then there was a poster board in our OCP open house, which has exacerbated the issue. So where was the engagement piece for all of those waterfront property owners? When did that become a piece of this OCP? And what was the consultation done after to speak with those people?
So the engagement for the OCP involved all community members, and we recognize that throughout the process, people have been able to get involved during different periods based on specific technical elements like a measurement of 30 meters. That was understood specifically from select owners who felt they would be impacted by that policy piece. So they were sharing their input on the matter. Council heard that and made a decision. And we continued to provide that ongoing engagement at the open house that we had on May 7th to kind of discuss, here's what's happened throughout this process. And we want to confirm the understanding of where we're going to go with this. It's set at 15 meters now. That was bolded on the board. We asked general questions throughout this entire process of what you like and what you don't, keep the waterfront public, maintain access, viewscapes and the like. This was one aspect that was technical in nature. This was their input being used to develop a technical component to actually implement something. And we received the feedback. People attended council. Council made a decision to put in a different requirement, and that's what staff has moved forward with in the document, and that's what was given at first reading. So it's taking the story aspect of it, and that one specifically included a technical component once that was further developed down the road. So it was going along in that process. So the community was engaged. This was a result of a specific development guideline component that is more technical in nature. It's kind of what the input resulted in at the end of the day.
And I respect you, and I don't want you to feel like attacked. You just happen to be in the hot seat, and because I need clarity too. And so, but that's your, like, that's how you experience that, and that's how you understand it. For people that aren't as like experienced or don't have the education that you have and aren't in it, what actually ended up happening was that there's a wave of fear from those people not being engaged. And then that was relit at the OCP open house. And it's just a tiny example of how the public has an extremely limited amount of time to try to get a comprehension on a document. And so when you know what it means, I know what it means, but for them, it needs to be so simple. So when we go and have an open house and all they saw was that we're back to square one. Like I thought we just talked, they don't understand. And so I just want us to do a better job of going back to like the simplicity, because we have such a small window to capture that engagement and to make an impact. I feel like we lost out on a lot of community trust, because we're still like, I've got 3 emails tonight being like, I thought we'd asked for this. Why is it back? Because they don't have that comprehension. And that's not just for you. That's just like a comment on the process.
Yeah, I think I just want to circle back to the fact that there's been extensive engagement and we've been open about what the results of that engagement entailed. That's why we've had since the beginning on the picturesoup.ca website, all of the results of our engagement sessions in multiple formats. And when the 30 meters came about, we're going back to August of last year when that went out in a face-to-face engagement opportunity out in an open air setting at the Celebrate Souk event. So we've been hoping to get as much engagement as possible. And we understand when something comes to the council table, typically that's when people will get more engaged because they realize that something is real now. And for us, the whole process has always been real since day one. We've been wanting to get that feedback. We wanted to establish those relationships with the community members so that we have an informed process and try to make it as easy as possible. We realize that there's concern within the community about what's in the document or what isn't in the document, and they're contributing to the process, and we appreciate that. And that change was made with their input, and council gave that direction to staff, and that's what exists right now. But to disregard the conversation and not bring it forward at the open house, we wanted to tell the story to the public of it started off as 30 meters based on the input that we had going back a year and a half ago to develop this, and that a change was made to 15 meters, and that's what it is currently. And then just to have continuous conversation from there, which is what I felt occurred on May 7th. I know I didn't get to speak to everybody in that room. There's a lot of people attending that day, but the conversation continues after May 7th. It continues on right now. So we can work to provide that clarity, but I think we need to at least explain how we got to that point. And that's why 30 meters was on the board. We weren't trying to change it back. We were just trying to tell a story and let people weigh in, because there weren't people in attendance at those council meetings when we talked about 15 meters. That it was their opportunity to come to the open house and get more information. So we shared the full context of that.
And I know you know that because you're in it, but for someone that's not going to that open house and not having that, that's not what they experienced. So that's where it's like, it's our job here to be the bridge in that gap for that education piece and clarity, because sometimes there is like a mass full of emotion because there's a lack of understanding, but we also have to assist them. Like sometimes we don't share what we're doing and people get upset and they fill the void because they think nothing's happening. Like there is a lot that weighs on us as well. So there's an opportunity for us to coordinate better on those communication pieces, because you're looking at it from your perspective. But when someone who doesn't crack the OCP finds out through someone else that all of a sudden there's a different setback, they get passionate about it, they don't have the context, they send an email in, we make an action, then they go to the OCP, all they saw was that we reverted. They don't have that. And so it just comes down to a communication piece.
We're still working on it though. We're still in a draft. Councillor Beddoes, did you want to comment?
I do agree. I mean, obviously that open house caused some confusion, which I was there in the front lines. I don't know how many times I told people it's 15 meters. Council voted for 15 meters. And then some people just would not believe it. I don't understand that. Why? There was that great distrust. That 15 meters, 30 meters was flagged before it even came to council by the committee as being a contentious issue, and must be left up to council to make that decision. The originally, and again, talk about the process slightly, is that when the committee was given their marching orders, it did seem like we were there to just oversee the work, and basically the committee said, no, we're not going to do that. We want to be right involved in every step of the way. And at that particular time, when we started the engagement process, the call went out to the community to become engaged, and a good number of the community did become engaged. But I can tell you right from the offset that the biggest part of the engagement was, I don't know if it hurt anybody's feeling, but the Green Lobby. And they came in with guns a-blazing, and very articulate, very well done. And a lot of the discussion with that group was, protect the waterfront and protect the trees and all that sort of stuff. not exactly big on people's individual property rights. So I'm just guessing a little bit about that's where the 30 meters came in. But the realism of the committee, when we looked at places like Feral Estates and 30 meter setback, we could see that that was wrong. And I think you all were aware that I tried to make that change in initial, and I'm not blaming council because there's a procedure and we were all going to review it and make that decision at that particular time. It's unfortunate that it's blown out of proportion and out of hand. But, you know, anybody that's listening tonight, it is 15 meters at the waterfront and it will stay 15 meters. And that was the intent of council. That was the intent of the OCP committee. And, you know, I don't know how to split hairs and how it got to 30 meters. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just trying to, you know, from my perspective, it was a mistake. And that's why it's gone back to 15 meters. You cannot do that to people's property rights. You know, and we heard from a number of them and over again. So I don't know how to get the information out there about, I mean, it frustrates me to see these emails keep coming in. How many times do we have to say it? It's 15 meters. It's going to stay 15 meters. That's just the way it is. And it's been 15 meters since incorporation in 2019, I think, or 2020. That's when we inherited it from the CRD. 1999, what did I say? Yeah, I get the centuries mixed up. So I just want to put a little bit of context in there because this has been a hot button item and been very frustrating for me because I was down there taking the brunt of it. And I didn't quite understand some of the nuances of where it came from. I just wanted to make everybody clear that that's where we're ending up. And that's what we're paid to do up here, is to make those decisions. And we made that decision and it was unanimous in the end. So maybe you can do a better job of communicating. I don't know, but you know, let's go forward from this point on. It is 15 meters. It's not going to change.
We will be getting to that section because I know, like, for some, I know I'm just cognizant of the hour and where everybody is at. We still have a lot of work to do. And, you know, to Councillor McMath's, you know, just query about council. I mean, early on, we decided to form a committee and we gave that work to the committee and then off they went, right? And we heard of some of the struggles. Councillor Beddoes worked through all of that to ensure that the committee had felt that they were involved. And that's where we had some tweaks and even lengthened the process or the frequency of meetings as best as we could in the pandemic. So in terms of
Especially the whole time to a growing pandemic.
Well, and
one week to the next.
changing health orders and all of that. So, and then we decided, you know, at many times, like, gee, do we continue? But none of us knew how long the pandemic was going to go on. And it's still hanging over us. It's not, it hasn't gone away yet. It's all there still, right? So it just is. But that's where, as our Mr. McInnes would say, he's like, now this is the heavy lifting part that council needs to do. And it's tedious for us. And so in part, when I look at sort of the schedule, and I know that staff needs a schedule because they need, our availability isn't, we're not always available every night of the week, calling and setting up special meetings, not crowding other items onto these meetings. Like, we had to have some meetings set out so that we know when this work can occur, because there's still the other district business that needs to come in, right? And that's where, you know, in a recent article, and whenever things are printed, it's difficult because I can't go back. Like, with some media reports recently, have some people upset, some people happy, all about what I said. My struggle with that is that I can't go back and edit it. I didn't write it. Like, if people are upset with me because of something I wrote, then I take full ownership of that. When someone else has done an article and is printed and chosen to print or write what they choose to, that's up to the reporter. But in that case, I had said, I'm not sure if this would be adopted. And in this term, because the reality is it's 9:30 and we're on this page. So I just didn't see how are we going to get through this whole document in 3 hours? I don't think it's fair on council to do that. We could have done this several, weeks ago when it came, but we want to now do that heavy lifting piece. And so I didn't say like, well, we're never going to adopt it ever. I mean, sometimes tonight it feels that way, but the reality is that otherwise we're just rubber stamping this. And I think in doing that, then we miss the nuances of various pieces. It means that we haven't read it or digested it fully. It's like, oh, okay, sounds good. It's an easy way to like, oh, shove it off and deal with it later. But that's an expensive exercise. I've sat here for 4 terms now, and it seemed to me, and sometimes all we were doing was amending OCPs. And it's like, I kind of equated to like, gee, you throw something in the water, it comes back the next day. Like, can't we just move off of it and fix things? And then in that time, while everyone believes we're fixing it, nothing else gets done. So the risk of adopting something with the intent of amending later means nothing else happens, because all we will be doing is focusing and battling on this. So that's why I think it was important that we're just methodically, I know it's tough, just getting through it as best as we can. And I know we're not reading it the way we're supposed to, but to be flipping all over it, we're going to miss something in doing that. So I think we are taking the right approach to this, recognizing that, okay, as we come back to it, maybe there are some simple things like the page number makes total sense. Okay, there's a connection between these two that I keep forgetting even as I turn the page. And then this is where we will get to those pieces. There's probably some, I checked, there's 4 people on YouTube. So some of those might be saying, well, gee, are they ever going to get to the development permit piece on this? Like, they're never going to get there. Well, we are. It's just we need to take the time to get through it so we understand it. As it is. I just so yeah, so it is. But I appreciate it. Like, it's just such a big document. And it's bigger than all of us. Like, really, you want something that stands the test of time. Like, when I read the 2001 OCP, the vision there, I mean, the language has changed, but there was about creating a village with a bustling town center that is friendly and walkable. And I mean, different language, because it was the language of the day. Where folks felt the town center should be has shifted, I think, over time. There was a lot of emphasis on Goodridge Island, but probably at that time, it was the heart of a commercial setting in Sud. That's where most people were probably employed. So it would make sense that that would be a strong economic place. Now we know it's a really difficult brownfield site, and we've shifted the town center elsewhere. There was also a time with the last OCP, there was a lot of collisions with it. So it tried to encompass all the master plans, but then we had master plans that in some ways said different things. So then it was like, separate them out. And then it was the land use committee of the day that said, do the transportation master plan first and then the OCP. And I remember sitting there thinking, that's kind of interesting. You think it would be the other way around, but that's what the land use committee wanted to see, because the transportation is a big concern, and it needed the emphasis, it needed the focus by council, it needed the funding in the capital plan. We needed to get on with the infrastructure. So that's where the transportation master plan and parks and trails plan came first, and then we're starting on the OCP, whereas normally you would flow them the different way. And then they said, keep them separate. So that's where I find it interesting, where some would say you need more of that in the OCP. I'm like, but your recommendation was to keep them separate. So that's what we're doing. And it makes sense that they're done that way. And the other policy sets are separate because they keep changing. They're all very good though. The agricultural plan is 2012. It's still relevant. Our accessibility plan is still excellent. It still needs we just need to do a lot of those pieces. So I'll leave it at that, because I know we have a lot of pages to go to, but I recognize where you're at with this for sure. And I think that's where, as Mr. McKinnon said, you're going to have a lot of hard and heavy work to do, council, and hope you're prepared for it. But getting through it all in one meeting, I just, and that's why at least we have some other dates, and that's where to staff, like, I think those dates where we're sort of saying, and this is maybe what's raising some concern by some in the community. I was at the open house too. It was very crowded. It was the only venue our staff could find. everyone wants to do things. So it was busy and it's just the way it goes. And that was all we had. My point is then it's hard to see because sometimes at different times it was very crowded and to get things. So you're only looking at something from the distance and then be like, it's still there. But that's where I think as we go through this process and we get to a draft, then it's going to say something different. It's just the timing is, it's just that length of the process. So where is everyone at? It's just, it's 9:30. Wrap up section 2, Councillor Lajeunesse.
Part 3 really gets into the guts of things, and I think it's taken us 3.5 hours to go through the semantics of the first couple of sections, and I don't think we should rush through section 3. So I think that would be a good place to pause.
And then I think you could say, like, we're taking our time and due diligence and also processing, like, thank you, Councillor Bateman, for referring to some of it, because taking that public input and what we learned and what we hear and what we receive, and actually, like, this system is just clunky, right? Because we're in a council forum, the public can't speak to us. We'll probably get more emails about that or whatever. And we're not at those sections yet. So I think as we get to those sections, it'll become more clear for those that are following. It's just, I think it's easier that we just keep going in order. And yeah, I think we're going to get into some real crunch work, but at least we're understanding the document more and the flow of it all and finding good things to address. So yeah, let's finish up this section 2. So I only have one more piece on equitable and respectful. Not to drive everyone nuts, on the bottom of page 49, where support family-friendly, accessible, and seniors housing. One term that came up through the pandemic was the use of vulnerable populations. And so that would be housing for youth, for elders, for those needing universal accessible. Like, would that be, rather than just focusing on seniors housing? Youth aging out of care, like, we're addressing work through the Hope Center. So yeah. Councillor St. Pierre?
I don't know if it's sufficiently covered or not, but I'd also suggest that we need to be aware of our workers in tertiary sectors, which are not necessarily well paid. So tourism would come in big. We need places for them as well.
I think that sort of fit through but we could add workforce. I don't know what if that fits in the vulnerable populations, seems to catch on.
We don't have to define everything under the sun, but I think that's a very valid thing about that segment. Society is very vulnerable.
The vulnerable
Yeah,
populations.
seniors and vulnerable housing.
So that also addresses youth, low income.
Yeah, it could be anybody.
Shelter, all of
and
that.
even those marginally employed. Okay.
Do we even need the last bullet? Because to the left, keep super affordable, provide housing choices for all, period. Like, I feel like, who are we? It'd be shorter to say who we're excluding. Who are we not supporting? You know what I mean? I don't think that bullet needs to exist at the bottom.
Yeah.
Interesting.
As Mr. Schaefer said, now it's the flow, like, so just to make sure, like, there could be a connection to that later. And this is when we get to the policy area, we may see that. So I just, I don't want to take, I don't mind improving it. I'm just concerned now as I wanted to take some up, that there's a ripple effect on that.
So but
A domino effect.
what was our definition for affordable? 30%?
Yeah.
So that is going to capture people that aren't captured in that bullet point. And so if this is our high level aspirations, then we can get more specific.
It's like a whole, it's a whole heading, right? Support family friendly, accessible and seniors housing is like a whole heading with several actions and policies under it. So that's where I would think we would need to leave it in and just take the vulnerable population, just change the language. Because otherwise this piece wouldn't fit under an objective. That's how I've now learned about this. There's objectives tied to these.
Yeah, unless we jump around the document, we just don't
Yeah.
know what's happening.
Okay, we'll just leave it and let's just, Councillor Logans?
When reading the objectives, the policies and actions don't really fit with vulnerable populations either. So I don't know that that's applicable in that specific bullet. It may be one that is covered under another section in objective 4. But this one is specifically talking about ensuring that we have secondary suites. I know we talked about making secondary suites that aren't a flight of stairs down so that seniors can access them, and having secondary suites with 2 or 3 bedrooms so that families can access them. So it doesn't really speak to vulnerable, but I'm sure that another piece might. And there you go, page 134. Thank you, Councillor Bateman. And that may be a better place. Does that word belong in here? Yes, I'm sure we can find a place for it, as it is a word of our current time, but it just doesn't fit in that last one.
Yeah, it goes under addressing the non-market housing needs, I think. So we can look at adding the language in there at that point. Councillor St. Pierre?
Recognize that we're all getting a bit tired at this point anyway. I suggest we just, given that this is an overview, we don't know what consequences are going to happen later if we make any major changes. I think we should just be going through it very, very quickly in order to identify any major issues that we can identify, ambiguities or whatever. Come up with any suggestions like Councillor Bateman's, let's put some page links and hang on to that until we get into the meat of it later on.
Sounds good to me. Page 50. I did exactly what I wasn't going to do. '50 and 51. Councillor Logans?
On page 50, I know you brought this up, Mayor Tate, and perhaps it's already been addressed at first reading when we discussed it, but it does say Sauk First Nation, and I think you wanted it to say Sauk Nation, as that's what they refer to themselves.
Yes, it's changed in my draft. Where do you
Yeah, I
see
was gonna
that?
say it might be changed already.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, that's here. Just a comment, Mr. Paulo, when we see things like create a safe and resilient community for all, or those things, another thought I had was something like a place we all belong. So I'm just going to throw that out to you. A lot of time in speaking with people is they want to feel they belong in our community. And sometimes when we get so detailed, the risk is leaving someone out, or not everyone wants to put themselves into a certain category, but if you feel you belong, then it's a place for everyone. That's just a takeaway for another something. Yeah, this is going to need a, like a fresh, I think we need to be fresh for this. And it's just recognizing that it's the time to get through this. Well, it's been tough because it's council's first time, but not our first time, because we received the draft of the committee of the whole, and we're receiving this whole thing and hearing from a lot of people. So listening was basically, we were listening in that meeting. And then taking those pieces and which the committee had identified and listening to it. But then part of why I supported first reading was because then it puts it into council's hands, where we can do this sort of work now, hear from the referral agencies, get it over to the CRD for the check-in and the other agencies, and get the legal review, like all those pieces, and what are they going to say or hear, or what other pieces will we learn through that. And then it becomes now the document, otherwise it stays with the committee. So then what do we keep directing back to the committee when they hit a point where there was decisions that we needed to make? So it needed to move into council's realm, really. And that's where it is, and it remains for a while. So yes, Councillor Lajeunesse.
Yeah, just to add to that, this is the first time that we've actually talked about this thing as a group. And so, yeah, I think it's important that people realize that too, that it wasn't a done deal, and it still isn't.
So in terms of next meetings, because we do have some additional meeting time scheduled now. So in like from today, I mean, obviously this is where we're going to adjourn and wrap up, but now we need to pick up on the next pieces. And we do have some meetings reserved, like special council meetings reserved, right? For OCP readings and such. Like, is that then, will that become the next committee of the whole for this?
That is one option that we could explore with council to continue this review process. We can also look at any other dates that might work with council scheduling as well to address this. The dates that we had set up were based on meeting certain milestones, and then, you know, this would need to happen and so forth. Knowing that we will need an additional meeting to go through this, I think we'll have to come back to council with additional scheduling updates and then kind of figure out from there where we're going. But obviously the priority now is to get council through this document to provide the necessary input so that we can return at a future date to make those amending motions before second reading. So I think that's kind of the priority now. Also knowing that staff is also working with specific timelines with our referral agencies as well, and making sure we get comments back. So there's still that aspect that we're working on the administrative side, in addition to the bylaw side with council as well. So we'll bring some updates to council on that. But yes, there is that June 7th date, I believe.
Or I guess staff will also reach out then and doodle poll us or whatever poll to see when we potentially may be available for other nights.
That's
We
right.
are limited to 6 p.m. Like we're just, it's going to be in the evening. So with I think 6 p.m. start was okay. Okay. Councillor St. Pierre.
Didn't order the suggestion or thought, but in the regular council meetings recently, our agendas have been relatively shorter. I'm curious as to whether or not we could start on the 6 o'clock when we don't have an in camera, potentially do 2 hours of committee of the whole, and then open up the regular meeting at 8 o'clock? No, not possible. Okay.
I think it's just the mindset, right? I don't know. Maybe, I mean, I just can't multi-think. So it's sort of focusing on, it's being prepared to address the council pieces, and then also just being in the mindset to work through this, like in a more casual form, and then being more formal and sticking. I'm speaking for myself. I would be challenged to do that. And then also, if we did have in camera matters, which we likely do, because we tend to have them almost all the time, it's like, then we're rushing stuff. So I think we just need to see what options come available and go with the best we can. Councillor McMath?
So just for clarity, we're gonna hear back from staff about dates and availability for us, like a second committee of the whole meeting to finish.
Well, or maybe two more. It just,
Oh, yeah,
I
sorry.
just,
yeah.
I don't want to say
Yeah.
that we're gonna get through all of this in another 3 hours. I don't know.
My feeling is it's gonna go quicker than what we need. I think my feeling is everybody's just got their feet wet with this, including me for the feedback. I think we're all on the same page now. I expect it to go quicker. Just my observation.
The eternal optimist.
Okay. Anything further from staff?
I was just going to say that when we do get into the more technical pieces of this document, that's, staff listen to the input from the community at the engagement. So we do have a number of options that can be presented to council to consider to address that feedback that we received. So I would think that would at least help both speed up the process and also acknowledge that input that we received from the community, just to know that it was heard and that we do have a number of options that ultimately council can make a decision on based on the feedback that they received as well.
So how is that coming to us? The feedback from the open house? What does that look like? What is that going to look like?
So when we were going to be coming forward for the amendments and second reading, we were going to include all of that correspondence. But I also envision that as we went through this process, there would probably be some discussion on some of those specific areas. And that's where staff could also weigh in and provide some assistance on wording or possible options for council to consider in providing direction on those revisions to the document. So kind of more verbally at this point, but also documented in the report coming forward for the amending bylaw.
So, but we have to wait till second reading to see that?
That was how it was structured with the original. All of that feedback, we'll have to go back and look and see what we have to date. And yeah, I can provide an update.
My understanding is that that's exactly what's going to happen. As we go through this, you said you've got staff ready to give some context from the information you got at the open house. And then when it comes to second reading, it should be fairly clear. So it's a two-part thing. That's my understanding.
But I think it would be helpful for us to have it as soon as it's available, because then we can address it in there.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
And make those resolutions, and then it's visible in the draft at second reading.
Yes.
Because the concern would be that if we don't see that, we work through it. A council member may not be comfortable supporting second reading, because then it's coming in late and you want to see it before. So I think just as it's available, because while I was scribbling my comments on these, just to, I have notes to self on what sort of I heard. It would just save time, because then I'm going to start raising, and so whereas if you actually addressed it in the staff report and saw it, like whenever we could see that, I'm like, okay, I'm not the only one. It's actually better articulated in that way. So it just, I think as soon as, if it could be available to come to an upcoming,
Just give me some.
it's the
briefing.
timing on when it's
One
available, it would help, I think. Counselor McMahon?
I don't want a one pager. I want all of it at the cow preferably.
Yeah, as best as we, yeah, as it's available.
Yeah, and that's likely more practical for us now because the turnaround time from the open house to tonight's meeting, it was going to be a challenge to prepare all of that information. The expectation would be more verbal. Now that we're going to be continuing on from tonight, I think staff would have that availability to compile that information. So yes, the situation has changed so we can adapt and provide additional resource at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. So at this point, staff doesn't require a resolution for us other than an adjournment. It's like, okay, so to those, how many are viewing still, Ms. Temple? Just
We still have 3.
okay, to those that are viewing, thank you for being with us tonight, and those in the room, thank you for being here anyway with us. More to come, and thank you for your patience. Doing our best. Okay, motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Counselor McMath. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Good night, everyone.